Robb Stark stood upon the battlements of the captured fortress, his gaze drawn south across the rolling plains of the Riverlands. In the lingering twilight, the banners bearing the dire wolf of House Stark snapped in the steady breeze, illuminated now and then by passing torchlight. Soldiers gathered along the walls, their faces shadowed and haunted by months of bloodshed, but their eyes were filled with a certain fierce pride. They had marched far from home, from the harsh snows of Winterfell down to lands drenched in the warm sun of the south, guided by the young Wolf King who had led them to victory despite every daunting force. On this night, with their enemies broken and King's Landing finally within their grasp, the future hummed with a sense of promise. Robb felt the presence of his father's memory like a blade of justice guiding him, justice for Ned Stark's execution, for the outrages visited upon the north, and for the countless innocents who had been caught in the crossfire of ambition. He inhaled deeply, letting the cool night air fill his lungs as he considered the days ahead. A quiet prayer went through his mind, let us survive this, let the realm find peace at last. The fortress was Harrenhal, once a cursed ruin that had seen more would-be kings than any castle ought. Now it belonged to House Stark, or so it seemed, by the fortune of war. Inside its scorched halls, the Northmen had established their command center. The stone walls, rumored to be haunted by Harren the Black's ghosts, felt oppressive, but Robb had no time to dwell on curses. He had orders to dispatch, alliances to confirm, prisoners to handle. The Tullyfish rose alongside the direwolf, signifying the union of the Riverlands with the north. Word had arrived from the scouts that the Lannister forces who still attempted to regroup would not trouble them for weeks. So it was said, so it might be if fortune remained on their side. But war was rarely so simple. Yet, in spite of the uncertain times, there was reason for hope. Word had also arrived that King's Landing itself had descended into chaos. The boy King Joffrey Baratheon was rumored to be quaking behind the Red Keep's walls, his mother's manipulations unraveling, and half the city cowering in fear of the Tyrells or the Starks or the Sells-Words who might take advantage of the confusion. The Lannisters' hold on power had never felt so precarious. Tywin was defeated, or at least in full retreat, reports were conflicting. Stannis Baratheon lingered somewhere in the south, his own ambitions unsettled after his attempt on King's Landing had failed in the face of wildfire and the alliances that had turned against him. The Tyrells, having once saved the Lannisters, now dispatched envoys to Robb's camp, promising potential friendship if he could offer them favorable terms. Catelyn Stark, watching her son from the dim corridors, felt conflicting waves of pride and grief. She had lived to see her son triumphant, fulfilling what so many had whispered might be impossible, the avenging of Ned Stark. But she also sensed the burden pressing upon him. She knew how war demanded its share of cruel choices, each more morally convoluted than the last. There would be men to pardon or punish, new alliances to be formed with houses that once sided with the enemy. The knowledge that Robb, young as he was, had grown into a figure that rivaled the greatest lords in the realm both thrilled and saddened her. She remembered him running across the courtyard at Winterfell as a bright-eyed boy, never suspecting he might one day lead an army in a war for the Iron Throne. But the times had changed them all. The war had shaped them in ways they could never have imagined. By the light of flickering torches, Robb descended the stone steps into Harrenhal's great hall, that cavernous chamber that once dwarfed all who stood within it. The hall still bore the scars of dragonfire from centuries past. Rubble-littered corners and smoke stains streaked the walls. Despite this grim setting, a makeshift dais had been erected near the far side and chairs set for the principal commanders of the Northern and Riverlands forces. Seated around a broad table were the great Jon Umber, Galbart Glover, Roose Bolton, Edmure Tully, Catelyn Stark, and a handful of seasoned captains. The heavy door groaned behind Robb as he entered, his dire wolf, Grey Wind, padding at his heel. All conversation paused. His men, his allies, some older than him by decades, turned as one. The hush in the room signaled their respect for him. Outside, he might still be called the young wolf, but in these walls, after all the battles and cunning maneuvers, it was clear that he was not just a boy pretending to be a warlord. He had earned his right to lead by being victorious where no one expected it. He took his seat, Grey Wind settling near his feet, the direwolf's golden eyes flicking over the attendees. "My lords," Robb said, clearing his throat. "We've come far. We've had victories beyond expectation. But now, if the rumors prove true, King's Landing is in disarray. The Lannisters have been broken on the field and their principal allies scatter like leaves in an autumn gale." He paused, his lips curling into a slight smile. "Our scouts say the gates could fall if we press soon." A series of glances were exchanged. Edmure Tully wore the expression of a man uncertain if he dared hope so openly. The great Jon roared with approval. Bolton's pale eyes narrowed with interest, his face betraying little. "This is what we've bled for," Edmure said, voice brimming with fierce pride. "We all want to see justice done. The Lannisters must pay for all they have done to our families." Robb nodded. "Justice, yes, but also we must think about the realm. The Lannisters have overreached. The realm is hungry for stability. They'll not endure another year of war if we can bring a quick end to this." His mother offered him a searching look. She had always reminded him that honorable men did not necessarily make the best kings. But she also knew that if anyone could strive to balance both, it was her son. "We press the attack," Robb said, his voice more certain now. "We give them no chance to regroup. If the Tyrells indeed stand ready to switch sides, so be it, we secure their goodwill. If not, we face them on the field as well. But I suspect they see which way the wind blows." The Greyjoy's booming laugh echoed through the hall. "Aye, they do. They've lost faith in Lannister gold. Now they'll come begging for scraps from the new king in the north." Roose Bolton's calm voice cut through the noise. "Yet we must be careful. It's one thing for the Tyrells to seek new friendships, but quite another for them to bend the knee outright. There are marriages and alliances yet to be considered." He spoke with that eerie politeness of his, a slight tilt to his head that made Robb uneasy. Still, Bolton's caution was warranted. The night wore on with strategies and possibilities, each man contributing their knowledge. Letters would be drawn up, ravens sent. The march on King's Landing would continue with all haste. By the time Robb left the table, dawn was no more than a few hours away, and the weight of destiny hung upon his shoulders. But he felt something he had not felt in a long time, the sureness that his cause was just and that victory was not just a dream. His rest was short. Come daylight, they prepared to march. The bannermen assembled in the courtyard, their armor rattling, horses stamping impatiently. Winterfell's men-at-arms stood side by side with Riverlander levies and some smaller lords who had joined after the tides of war shifted. The sun rose behind them, casting their shadows long across Harrenhal's blackened walls like a host of specters ready to sweep the land. They numbered fewer than they had at the start of the war, for many had fallen. But those who remained were tested, determined, and fiercely loyal to Robb Stark. Robb rode among them, gray wind loping easily at his side. The men greeted him with cheers that warmed him more than any cloak could. Catelyn and Edmure stayed close, the Tully fish pinned proudly next to the dire wolf on their cloaks. Over the final months, heartbreak and tragedies had hammered them, but in standing together they had endured. They wore that endurance like a badge of honor. They departed Harrenhal as a column that stretched far along the King's Road heading south. Along the way, peasants peered out from huts, seldom daring to cheer but showing gratitude in their eyes to be free of the Lannisters' terror. Supplies were found at certain strongholds that had declared for House Stark. Fresh horses were brought in from the loyal Riverlords. Words of support trickled through. Robb's chosen outriders screened the flanks, ensuring no Lannister ambushes could strike them unawares. But they encountered little resistance. And so, day by day, mile by mile, they neared the seat of royal power. Now and again, ravens arrived with letters detailing the city's confusion. Tywin Lannister had vanished into the west to gather what remained of his forces. Joffrey and his mother had grown more tyrannical in their desperation, punishing suspected traitors, driving the small folk to near riot. The walls of King's Landing were said to be manned by soldiers who had little stomach to fight, half-starved and unpaid. The Tyrells, according to rumor, had locked themselves inside their manors, uncertain whether to keep supporting the Lannisters. Rifts ran deep through the capital. The time, it seemed, was ripe for a new claimant to the Iron Throne. Late one afternoon, Robb's vanguard caught sight of the city's walls glittering along the horizon. The gold of the setting sun painted the battlements, and the Red Keep rose in the distance, an imposing fortress perched on its promontory overseeing Blackwater Bay. Even from here, the city seemed to hum with anxious energy. Soldiers in the front ranks raised a ragged cheer, brandishing spears and swords. This was the moment they had marched for. "The Wolf King," a voice shouted, and the cry was echoed 100-fold. Robb inhaled sharply. The memory of his father's execution flitted through his mind, that day he had heard of the unspeakable. He tightened his grip on the reins. They made camp that night on the outskirts of the city, well beyond the range of its archers but close enough that the flicker of torchlight could be seen on the outer walls. Scouts circled the perimeter, and negotiations were begun with any official or envoy who dared ride out. Word spread like wildfire, "King in the north has come." Some insisted that the city's gates would open before dawn, that the small folk would rise up against the hated Lannisters. Others feared a cunning trap, wildfire hidden beneath the streets. Robb weighed each possibility as he conferred with his top advisors. The final decision was his and his alone. Morning broke in a haze of pink and gold. Robb's banner flew high in the brightening sky, the Stark dire wolf dancing on gray cloth. He arrayed his forces in sight of the walls, a show of strength that made the defenders tremble. Indeed, the men on the walls looked thin and uncertain. Cersei Lannister, it was said, had not appeared in public for days. Joffrey was presumably cowering in the Red Keep. If the Tyrells still commanded part of the city, they kept silent. Robb advanced with a small party, a bold move, but one that signaled his willingness to parley if the defenders would only lay down arms. Hundreds of archers from the north stood ready to retaliate if a single arrow flew from the battlements. Tension coiled tight as the gates loomed larger. But no arrow was loosed. After a short wait, a small group emerged from the city gate under a banner of truce. They were a pitiful sight. A handful of gold cloaks with dull eyes, and behind them a trembling court official who introduced himself as Lord Giles Rosby, caretaker in the city while the Lannisters scuttled within the Red Keep. He stammered, mouth twisting around words of forced politeness. He bowed as best he could. "My lord, my king," Rosby amended, casting an apologetic glance. "The city does not wish to resist you. We are hungry, and those who remain have no desire to die for a mad boy's whim. We beg that you come as a merciful conqueror. Spare the small folk, let us open the gates." The gold cloaks are prepared to yield. Robb studied this man for a moment, seeing in him the same fear that had plagued the realms since the war began. The city was on the brink of ruin, starved and battered by infighting. "I am Robb Stark," he said, voice carrying over the hush. "We've come to demand justice for my father, for the wrongs done to the north and to the Riverlands. I have no quarrel with the small folk. Those who lay down arms will be spared. If any in the city remain loyal to Joffrey, let them come forth and face me. If not, lower your banners, open your gates." A ripple went through the gold cloaks. They had no desire to test these northern swords after hearing all the tales. Lord Rosby bowed low. "We shall open the gates at once. The city is yours, my king." There was no immediate exultation from the northern ranks. Instead, there was a tension as though all feared a trick. But Robb gave the signal to his men, and slowly they advanced. The gates creaked open, a sound that might as well have been the groan of centuries of ambition and conflict. The gold cloaks stepped aside, letting the spearmen of the north enter. Soon, the wide main street leading from the Gate of the Gods to the heart of the city was lined with Stark soldiers. The small folk peered from alleyways, unwashed children cowering behind mothers, each uncertain whether the new conquerors would be an improvement over the old tyrants. They marched in, discipline held, no man allowed to break ranks or loot. It was a testament to the loyalty and iron rule Robb had cultivated. Grey Wind strode at the front with Robb, and the watchers recoiled at the sight of the dire wolf. But to the hungry masses, the savage beast was less frightening than the thought of the Lannisters' cruelty continuing. Some did bow as Robb passed. Some even cheered in hoarse voices. Overhead, the sky was a perfect blue, as if mocking the city's scars. At last, they reached the Red Keep's outer barbican. Here at least, the warlike spirit remained. The gates were shut, and a scattering of Lannister men-at-arms manned the ramparts. But their numbers were few, their hearts clearly not in the fight. Robb signaled again. Archers knocked arrows, siege engineers prepared. A small parley was offered, and after a short exchange with trembling guards, the gate was opened without a single arrow fired. So concluded the Lannisters' last show of resistance. It was inside the keep that Joffrey was found, huddled in the throne room with a handful of Kingsguard, though the fear on their faces made them uncertain about whether to protect or surrender him. The great hall of the Red Keep was eerily silent, its high windows letting in beams of sunlight that fell upon the Iron Throne itself, that mass of twisted swords hammered into a seat of unearthly power. Robb stood before it with all the weight of his father's memory upon his shoulders. This had been the spot of Ned Stark's downfall, the scene of injustice that had sparked a war. Now Joffrey quivered before him, a boy still, but with cruelty etched into the lines of his face. He stared at Robb with an ugly mixture of fear and anger. Next to him stood Cersei, her golden hair in disarray, her dress torn as if from days spent in feverish anxiety. Cersei looked upon Robb with an expression torn between defiance and despair. She held her son's arm possessively as though hoping that maternal fury might stave off the storm. The Kingsguard, who had sworn to defend Joffrey with their lives, glanced at one another. The memories of the battles lost in the field burned bright. The knowledge that tens of thousands of soldiers loyal to Robb stood in the yard outside weighed on them. They were outmatched by any measure, and half the city had already yielded. Silence stretched. At last, Joffrey opened his mouth to speak, but what emerged was closer to a shrill cry. "You have no right," he spat, but his voice cracked with fear. "I am the king. Io." Cersei pushed forward, more controlled. "If you have come for revenge, take it upon me, not my son. He is only a child." Robb studied them both. The memory of his father's death flared red-hot. The men behind him shifted, waiting for his command. There was an urge within him to let fury guide his sword. But he remembered Catelyn's caution and his father's teaching about the value of justice over mindless vengeance. "You speak of your son being a child," Robb said quietly. "Yet you let him sign death warrants and condemn innocents. You put a sword in his hand and called him king. The realm has suffered for it. Now, Joffrey, your rule is ended." Joffrey shrank back, furious tears in his eyes, but he gave no further retort. Cersei cast a final, desperate look around as though searching for a final ally. But none remained. She exhaled, head bowing in defeat. Robb's men surrounded the deposed monarch. The king's guard, at the last, offered no great resistance. They lowered their swords, letting Robb's soldiers disarm them. Cersei was pulled away from her son. The boy king was forced to his knees before the Iron Throne, trembling in rage and terror, his voice lost in a squeak of indignation. "Take them to the dungeons," Robb commanded, speaking to Roose Bolton, who lingered among the front ranks. "They will stand trial for what they have done." He paused, letting the finality sink in. "We will not be them. We will not dishonor ourselves with the slaughter of children." Bolton's pale eyes widened slightly, but he bowed. "As you command, your grace." The words were a foreign note, for it was the first time Bolton had openly called Robb by a kingly title in the Red Keep itself. Soon, the ominous echoes of steps faded as Joffrey and Cersei were led away, the once mighty Lannister presence subdued at last. Silence washed through the hall. Then, from beyond the open doors, cheering broke out. Word spread as the gold cloaks in the yard shouted the news. Joffrey was taken, the city was delivered. Catelyn and Edmure and all the northern lords stood at Robb's side, looking to him with wonder. There, before the Iron Throne, Robb felt the full gravity of his triumph and the terrifying knowledge that the next step would define the fate of the realm. This was no longer a war of vengeance alone, it had become a conquest to restore justice, to unite a land broken by division. He stood in thought for a long moment. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he ascended the raised platform that held the Iron Throne. Its fused blades glimmered with centuries of legend and cruelty. He did not seat himself immediately. Instead, he looked back at his mother, at the great Jon, at Edmure, and all those who had marched with him. He remembered their courage, their sacrifices, and the cost in blood. He drew a breath, reached out, and let his hand rest on the cold steel of the throne's arm. The sword points pricked at his skin, sharp but not enough to draw blood unless he was careless. In that moment, a hush rippled across the assembled lords. The realm had a new king if he so chose to claim it. He had been declared king in the north long ago, but now all 7 kingdoms lay before him. He lowered himself onto the seat, an unmistakable symbol. A frisson of energy passed through those witnessing. Some knelt outright, dropping to their knees, while others simply looked on in awe. From the distant courtyard to the Firths corridor, the men of the north and the Riverlands began to hail him. It came in waves, a chant that built upon itself. The king in the north. The king of the 7 kingdoms. Robb Stark closed his eyes for a heartbeat. A swirl of conflicting feelings churned within him, triumph, grief, resolve, and a flicker of pride he hoped would not burn him. He opened his eyes, and the realm lay at his feet. With King's Landing secured, the next days became a whirlwind of administration. Wary of the city's fragility, Robb immediately put out decrees that promised any who swore fealty would be pardoned. The small folk needed bread more than more swords pointed at their throats. The city gates opened to supply wagons from the Riverlands, guided by Edmure's men. The Tyrells, seeing the tide turn for certain, sent forth Mace Tyrell's brother Garth to pledge loyalty if the new king would honor their holdings and consider a marriage alliance. For the moment, Robb kept them at arm's length, but he listened. The Tyrells held considerable power in the Reach, and forging peace with them could avert another bloody front. He also received envoys from Dorne, from the Vale, from the Stormlands. All corners of the realm were eager to learn if this new Wolf King would bring stability or more strife. A few older lords balked, grumbling that the North had never been meant to rule all 7 kingdoms. Others whispered that Stannis might try one final gambit. But so far, Stannis had not shown himself, and more, the notion of further war grew unpalatable to houses that had seen too much death. Within the Red Keep, order had to be restored. Robb placed men he trusted in key positions, but not all were from the north. He recognized that to rule a kingdom, he needed the cooperation of the southern lords as well. He reaffirmed Ser Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, as the commander of the City Watch, giving him license to reform the Gold Cloaks and rid them of corruption. He set other river lords in charge of the crown's finances until someone with the relevant expertise could be found. Most importantly, he established a code of conduct for his men, ensuring no outrages were committed against the populace. If anyone broke those decrees, they were punished swiftly. Word spread that King Robb was an honorable sort, one who cared not only for the proud lords but for the commoners. That act alone began to ease tensions. There remained the matter of justice for the Lannisters. Jaime Lannister was not to be found in the city, reportedly captured and then freed under strange circumstances in the Riverlands. Cersei and Joffrey languished in the dungeon under guard. Tyrion Lannister was said to have fled or vanished, no one quite knew. Tywin himself was regrouping in the west. This unsettled Robb somewhat. The threat of Tywin Lannister had not vanished. But for now, King's Landing was secure and the realm watched Robb's every move. He took counsel day after day with Catelyn, Edmure, the Great Jon, Roose Bolton, and a growing cadre of southern lords. In these councils, decisions were made regarding the formation of a small council that would advise Robb in governance. Though as king he had the final say, it was wise to gather diverse voices. Some pressed him to make a grand show of executing Joffrey and Cersei. Others reminded him that a gesture of mercy might win him more allies. He wrestled with these questions. In the end, he recalled how Ned Stark would proceed, carefully guided by principle but also mindful that too much leniency could be seen as weakness. Eventually, he announced that Joffrey would stand trial. As for Cersei, complicity in Ned's execution and other crimes would also be weighed. This trial would be public, he declared, to let the realm witness the condemnation of tyranny. In secret, he suspected that the outcome was clear: Joffrey would be found guilty. But the mere fact of a trial under a legitimate process was a radical departure from the Lannisters' methods. A wave of approval rippled through King's Landing at this news. Robb found it a small but significant victory. Meanwhile, letters flew across the realm. Some houses, such as the Martells in Dorne, responded cautiously, acknowledging Robb's claim but withholding open allegiance until they saw how events would unfold. Others, like the Arryns in the Vale, murmured that they had no quarrel with the Stark upon the Iron Throne, especially as Lady Lisa Tully was Catelyn's sister. The Stormlands had been split by Renly's death and Stannis's dogged but failing claim. Robb extended a hand to them, indicating that those who served the realm faithfully would find no hostility. In time, the day of Joffrey's trial arrived. The throne room brimmed with onlookers. Lords and ladies, gold cloaks, small folk who could fit within the columns. Joffrey was brought forth in chains, eyes wild. He glared at the spectators, cursing them, cursing Robb, cursing all. Cersei was there as well, though her stare had gone hollow. She seemed more like a specter of her former proud self. A panel of respected lords and ladies sat in judgment, with Robb presiding upon the Iron Throne. Witnesses were summoned to testify to the outrages Joffrey had ordered, from Ned Stark's execution to the abuses in the city. The boy spat and screamed. But the outcome was inevitable. The panel of lords declared him guilty of murder, cruelty, and usurpation. Robb pronounced the sentence. "You took my father's head," he said, voice reverberating. "You tormented the realm. For these crimes you shall pay with your life." Then, in a nod to his father's teachings, he added, "The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword." "But you," he paused, recalling that Joffrey was but a boy in truth, though a vicious one. "You are no man. Still, I will not shirk my duty." He drew his sword, Ice, the ancestral Stark blade. It had been returned to him from the Lannisters' keepers under the new regime. Now, in front of the silent throng, Robb took Joffrey's head with a clean stroke, an execution that reverberated through the Red Keep. So died Joffrey Baratheon, false king, and a hush followed, broken only by the murmurs of the spectators. Many expected that Cersei would be executed immediately as well, but Robb paused her sentence. She would be allowed to speak in her defense, to present any mitigating case. The rumor was that she had orchestrated much of the cruelty behind the scenes. She spat her defiance, denied any wrongdoing. But many witnesses contradicted her. In the end, it was clear she had been a willing architect of tyranny. Yet Robb, mindful of not wanting to appear too heavy-handed, commuted her sentence to life imprisonment in the Silent Sister's charge if she would take the vow of silence. She would live out her days atoning for her misdeeds, so he decreed. Some clamored for a swift end, but he held firm. He would not revel in the blood of a woman who had lost almost all. This decision, although controversial, sparked discussion that King Robb aimed to temper justice with mercy. It made enemies among some who demanded a full measure of revenge on the Lannister name, but it also earned him the grudging respect of neutral lords who recognized that a new era might indeed be dawning. In the weeks that followed, the city began to breathe more easily. Grain shipments were organized to feed the hungry. The Gold Cloaks, now under new leadership, slowly regained the trust of the populace. A temporary council was formed, including men and women of various houses to represent each major region. Robb had many pressing issues to address: the crown's debts, the question of succession, the placing of new lords in seats vacated by Lannister appointees, and the ever-present threat from Tywin Lannister, who had retreated to Casterly Rock, vowing to reclaim the capital. The realm's coffers were near empty, so deals with the Iron Bank of Bravos had to be managed carefully. Amidst these duties, a personal joy visited Robb's life. His wife, Jane Westerling, who had come to him in the chaos of war, arrived at King's Landing with her mother and siblings. Their marriage had started as a quiet union in the Riverlands, overshadowed by war, but now it was recognized by the entire realm. At the same time, though, the Tyrell envoys pressed the possibility of a different union to secure the loyalty of Highgarden. This challenge weighed heavily on Robb. He had pledged himself to Jane, and to break that vow would be to go against everything he stood for. Catelyn, anxious to preserve the stability of the realm, suggested that other compromises might be found. A marriage alliance might still come from Edmure or some other Tully or Stark relative. In the end, Robb made it clear he would not set aside Jane. He had no desire to follow the path of kings who cast aside their vows for power. The Tyrells, seeing his resolve, withdrew their demands for now, but the tension lingered. To appease them, Robb granted generous terms to Mace Tyrell. The Tyrell banner would be recognized among the greatest powers, Highgarden would gain trade privileges and a seat on the small council, and the king promised to address any injustices visited upon the Reach. That, combined with the Tyrell fear of being isolated, helped secure a measure of loyalty. Some whispered that House Tyrell always knew how to turn coats in time to end up on the winning side. But for Robb, what mattered was that they not rise in rebellion and drive the realm into further war. All the while, letters reached him regarding the Ironborn. Balon Greyjoy had taken advantage of the chaos to raid the northern coasts. Parts of the north lay burned. Winterfell itself had suffered the betrayal by Theon Greyjoy, though rumors said that Ramsay Snow had further devastated the place. This was a dagger in Robb's heart. He had begun this war to avenge Ned Stark and to protect the north. Now, as king on the Iron Throne, he could not forget his homeland's suffering. He sent urgent instructions to the lords remaining in the north to hold strong. He would free them from the Ironborn as soon as he could muster a force to send. The war was not over, not fully. Yet, at least in King's Landing, a semblance of peace settled over the corridors of power. The small folk grew accustomed to seeing the tall young king with auburn hair strode by his dire wolf. They heard stories of how he had outmaneuvered Tywin Lannister, capturing key strongholds and besting Jaime in battle. They whispered that he was more wolf than man, or that the old gods guided his sword. Children pointed at him in the streets and called him the Wolf King, wide-eyed with admiration. Robb, for his part, felt the invisible crown weigh heavier each day. Catelyn would often find him in the Godwood of the Red Keep, an unimpressive garden with a pale weirwood stump, for the tree had been cut down long ago. Still, he knelt there, eyes closed, praying to the old gods as if they might hear him through roots that had been severed ages past. "Mother," he asked quietly one day when she found him there, "do you think Father would have wanted this? All of it? The Iron Throne, the wars, the politics?" She rested a hand on his shoulder. "Your father wanted a realm at peace. He wanted the North safe, wanted to see you grow into a good man. You have become that man, Robb. But destiny can be cruel. The realm needs a king who cares for the people. If we can bring an end to this strife, if we can rule justly, then I believe your father's soul would be at ease." He nodded, gazing up at the empty sky above them. "I hope so. I still feel him guiding me, but I also feel as though I'm walking on a sword's edge. One misstep." She squeezed his shoulder. "We Starks know something of precarious steps. Take it day by day, my son." The days did pass, and with them came the slow forging of a new royal court. Robb named Roose Bolton as Warden of the North in the interim, a decision that unsettled him somewhat, but he recognized Bolton held significant power in that region. Edmure Tully was named to a prominent position, ensuring the Riverlands had representation at court. The Greyjohn, too boisterous and free-spirited for the intrigues of King's Landing, was sent north with a portion of the army to reinforce the ongoing struggle against the Ironborn and bring them to heel. Meanwhile, other prominent figures were raised to new positions, forging a patchwork government that sought to integrate the many fractured corners of the realm. All the while, Tywin Lannister bided his time at Casterly Rock. News reached the capital that Tywin had begun rallying lords of the Westerlands and forging alliances with rebellious riverlords who chafed under Tully authority. A second war front threatened. Robb could not allow Tywin to rise again and plunge the realm into further chaos. Yet, his own forces were spread thin, with a portion now returning north to drive out the Ironborn. He had to gather more allies if he were to shatter Tywin's final stand. He summoned the Tyrell envoys anew, pressing for their open support if Tywin marched. They agreed, though with more demands for favorable trade rights and positions in the new royal council. As distasteful as it was to trade privileges for swords, Robb saw no alternative if he wished to end Tywin's threat swiftly. The Tyrell host alone could provide thousands of fresh troops. Next, he appealed to the Dornish, offering them the justice they sought for the murder of Elia Martell and her children if they would support him against Tywin. The Martells, having long harbored grudges against the Lannisters, saw an opportunity for vengeance and autonomy. Their answer arrived in the form of a company of 500 spearmen, a gesture of willingness to fight if needed. More troops would come, they said, if Tywin truly threatened the peace. Meanwhile, a figure arrived from the Vale, Peter Baelish, cunning and courteous, offering to secure the Vale's neutrality or support as it suited him. Robb distrusted the man, but he recognized Baelish's skill at navigating the intricacies of power. So, with caution, he allowed Baelish to remain in King's Landing, where the Mockingbird sigil seemed to flit around every corridor. By the time the first snows of winter dusted the surrounding fields, the realm stood on the precipice of a new confrontation. Robb summoned the Great Lords to a final council in the Red Keep. The plan: unite a host from the Crownlands, Riverlands, and the Reach with Dornish support and march west to confront Tywin. Meanwhile, the north would repel the Ironborn. Once Tywin was subdued, the last major threat to the new king's reign would be ended. The lords of the small council nodded solemnly. They each recognized that Tywin Lannister, though battered, remained a formidable foe. If allowed to gather strength, he could still contest the throne. Catelyn remained by her son's side, though she watched with worry as he planned for yet more war. She had seen the toll it took on him, each life lost another weight on his heart. "Be careful," she told him one night as they stood by a window overlooking Blackwater Bay. "We have come so far. One miscalculation, one betrayal, and we risk losing it all." Robb clasped her hand gently. "I know. If I could find a way to settle this without more bloodshed, I would. But Tywin will never bend the knee while he lives. His pride will not allow it." On a cold morning, the host gathered beyond the city walls, a sprawling tapestry of banners: Stark dire wolves, Tully trout, Tyrell roses, Tarly huntsmen, red wine grapes, and more. Robb rode at the head, clad in armor that bore the gray dire wolf picked out in silver. His newly minted Crown's Guard, selected from his loyal knights, surrounded him. Grey Wind trotted along with them as always. The small folk gathered to cheer the departing king, well aware that should he succeed, the wars might truly end at last. They marched west, the roads sometimes muddied by early winter rains. Lords who had once fought on opposite sides now shared campfires under the new Wolf King's banner. The tensions between them were real, but overshadowed by a common desire to see Tywin ended. The friction was eased somewhat by the presence of a disciplined Northman leadership, though occasional feuds broke out. Robb insisted on swift resolution to any conflict. He reminded them all that this was not just a fight for the crown, but for peace in a realm that had grown weary of war. At last, news came that Tywin had gathered his forces near the Gold Road, intending to block Robb's passage. Scouts reported that the Westerland's lord had fewer numbers but significant fortifications. Many of the lesser houses remained loyal to him, whether through fear or deep-seated alliances. A confrontation loomed inevitably. Robb convened a war council in a large command tent. Around the table sat the Tyrell generals, the Riverlords, the Crownlands loyalists, and a few Dornish representatives. Maps were spread, strategies debated. Mace Tyrell blustered about a full frontal assault. Others argued for caution, remembering how cunning Tywin could be. Finally, Robb decided to attempt a pincer maneuver, forcing Tywin to split his forces to defend two approaches. The main host would threaten Tywin directly, while a secondary force under Edmure Tully would circle through the hills to cut off retreat. Meanwhile, a contingent of Tyrell horse would strike from a hidden flank. If all went well, Tywin would be forced into a disadvantageous battle. 3 days later, the armies met on a wide field streaked with the remnants of harvest. The morning sun broke pale over the horizon, revealing lines of knights, men-at-arms, archers, and siege engines. Robb rode up and down the front, encouraging his men, reminding them that this was the final step to lasting peace. There was something almost surreal about it, standing on a battlefield once more with the memory of so many battles behind him. But war, it seemed, had become part of his identity since the day he left Winterfell. When the horn sounded, a roar went up from both sides. Men clashed in a cacophony of steel. Arrows whistled overhead, horses thundered, men shouted war cries. In the thick of it, Robb led a cavalry charge that hammered Tywin's flank, the direwolf banner streaming behind him. Grey wind darted among the chaos, a fearsome sight that terrorized horses and men alike. The Tyrell knights came crashing in from the opposite side, completing the encirclement. Edmure Tully's contingent emerged from the hills, pinning the Lannister lines from behind. For a while, the battle's outcome hung uncertain. Tywin had his own skilled commanders, men who had survived years of conflict. He rallied them, formed tight ranks, and inflicted heavy losses on Robb's center. But as the day wore on, the noose tightened. One could see the frustration on Tywin's face, glimpsed through the swirl of dust and smoke. In a desperate bid, he tried to punch through Edmure's lines to escape, but the Tully pikes held strong. Surrounded, outnumbered, and pressed on all sides, Tywin's men began to break. Tywin himself, clad in gilded armor, refused to yield. He rallied a final knot of loyal bannermen. Robb, seeing the moment, spurred his horse forward, surging into the fray. Their swords met in a clash of sparks. Tywin was older, but no less fierce in single combat. He traded blow for blow with a precision honed by decades of warfare. Robb felt each impact rattle through his arms. At one point, Tywin's blade nearly bit into the joint of his armor, but Robb twisted away, bringing his sword up in a desperate parry. The fight swirled around them, men dying, horses screaming, banners toppling. Grey Wind lunged, snarling at Tywin. N steed, forcing the warhorse to rear. Tywin struggled to keep his seat, and in that moment, Robb's sword came sweeping across. It bit into Tywin's side, carving through his armor. The proud lion gasped, nearly dropping his blade. For a heartbeat, he looked at Robb with an expression that contained both hatred and a weary acceptance. Then, with one final effort, Tywin swung, but the blow glanced off Robb's shield. Grey Wind darted forward, snapping at Tywin's arm. The pain forced Tywin to drop his sword. Tywin Lannister slid from the saddle, collapsing onto the churned earth. Robb dismounted, sword in hand, the battlefield still raging around them but slowly subsiding as the Lannister line dissolved. He stared down at his longtime enemy, the man who had orchestrated so much misery for the Starks. Blood bubbled at Tywin's lips. "Finish it," Tywin rasped. Robb hesitated, remembering his father's face, the lessons of justice. "You killed my father," he said softly, voice edged with anger. "You brought war upon the realm for your pride." Tywin's eyes were fierce, even in mortal defeat. "The realm is built on power," he whispered. You will learn that. The wolf does not become lion simply because he sits on the throne." Robb raised his blade, feeling the hush of the moment. "I am not you," he said. Then, in a single stroke, he ended Tywin's life, severing the last piece of Lannister resistance. In that instant, the battlefield stilled, as if the heart of the conflict had been cut out. Some of Tywin's remaining knights, seeing their lord fall, dropped their swords. Others fled. The victory was decisive. In the aftermath, the combined armies greeted Robb with thunderous cheers. The Wolf King had conquered the lion on his own soil. The war, for all intents and purposes, was over. A sense of disbelief mingled with relief among the men. The wounded were tended to, the dead given honorable rites. Robb stood, blood splattered, as men knelt around him hailing him once more. Their voices thundered across the battlefield, carrying the new age's promise. With Tywin gone, Casterly Rock surrendered soon after. The Lannister name still existed, with Kevan and Jaime alive, but their power was broken. They bent the knee to the new king. In King's Landing, the news of Robb's triumph was met with celebration. Fireworks in the sky, feasting in the streets. The Wolf King was unstoppable, they said. Now, at last, the realm might know lasting peace. Weeks turned into months as Robb consolidated his reign. The Greyjoys, hearing of Tywin's death, began to fear the might of the Wolf King turning north. Balon Greyjoy, unyielding as ever, refused to kneel. But Theon Greyjoy, rumored to be living in torment under Ramsay Snow, eventually escaped and sought absolution. He came before Robb in King's Landing, battered and broken, confessing his wrongs against the Starks. Some in Robb's court demanded Theon's head. Others said a life sentence was more fitting. Robb, remembering their boyhood friendship, wrestled with the choice. In the end, he spared Theon and sent him to the Wall to join the Night's Watch, granting him one final chance at redemption. Though controversial, it reminded the realm of Robb's capacity for measured mercy even toward those who had deeply betrayed him. With that affair settled, Robb dispatched a great northern host led by Roose Bolton's best men and some loyal bannermen to oust the Ironborn from the north once and for all. The final skirmishes across the sea towers of Pike would drag on for another year, but the north began to reclaim its battered lands. Winterfell lay in ruins, but the Northmen vowed to rebuild it. For the first time in many moons, the prospect of hope and peace seemed real. In King's Landing, Robb held his formal coronation as King of the Seven Kingdoms. The ceremony was grand, albeit lacking some of the old southern pomp. The northern lords insisted on bringing the old gods into the rites. A new weirwood sapling was planted in the castle godwood, blessed in hushed ritual. Then the assembled lords proclaimed Robb of House Stark, the first of his name, King of the Undulls, the Royner, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. He wore a crown fashioned from hammered steel, each arc reminiscent of a wolf's head, with a single dire wolf sigil at the brow. Standing at his side were Jane, radiant in a gown of northern gray, and Catelyn, tears in her eyes as she watched her son ascend. Applause and cheers swelled in the throne room, echoing among the ancient swords of Aegon's conquest. In the following months, the new royal court took shape. Leading members from each region were invited to sit on the small council, ensuring representation across the realm. The Tyrells accepted key positions in exchange for sustaining the capital with bountiful harvests from the Reach. Dorne's envoys negotiated for partial autonomy. The Vale, under Lady Lysa, secured its borders but pledged fealty. The Stormlands, once sundered by the Baratheon Wars, acknowledged Robb as well, though many old-time loyalists still cherished the memory of Robert or Stannis. Still, the realm was united enough to function. That did not mean all was perfect. The transition from war to peace was fraught with local disputes, lingering hatred, and the difficulties of imposing new governance. The crown's coffers remained strained. The Iron Bank demanded payment of debts accrued by the previous regime. And in the Far East, rumors spoke of Daenerys Targaryen, mother of dragons, forging her own path in the Free Cities. Whether she would ever attempt to reclaim the throne was unknown, but the possibility existed. Robb and his council were aware, but after so much bloodshed, the thought of another major conflict felt distant. Still, day by day, the Seven Kingdoms began to heal. The roads grew safer. Rebuilding projects were undertaken in the Riverlands, once ravaged by repeated campaigns. The small folk were guaranteed fairer taxes, and the men of the North, once so far removed from the intrigues of the South, found themselves forging new bonds in the capital. Catelyn Stark oversaw charitable efforts, setting up houses of healing for the war-injured and urging widowed ladies to band together for mutual support. Edmure Tully worked tirelessly to ensure the new trade routes from the Riverlands to King's Landing remained secure, feeding the city's growing population. The small council hammered out alliances and laws. Robb himself took to heart the complexities of kingship. He held audiences where he listened to the petitions of commoners and lords alike, striving to mete out justice in the spirit of his father's legacy. He learned to navigate southern courtesy, but always with a certain northern frankness that the courtiers found both refreshing and startling. His marriage to Jane blossomed in these calmer days. He found solace in her company after endless hours of ruling. And though the memory of war lingered in his nightmares, the warmth of her embrace reminded him that life went on beyond the battlefield. One evening, Grey Wind slumbered at the foot of the Iron Throne while Robb held a late session. A handful of disputes had cropped up between minor Stormland lords. Robb listened to each side, trying to parse out the fair resolution. When at last he dismissed the parties, the hall fell quiet. He dismissed the guards and courtiers, retaining only his mother. Catelyn approached with a smile tinged by exhaustion. "It seems you are settling in as a king," she said softly, glancing at the dire wolf who stretched his massive limbs. Robb gave a short laugh. "Am I? Most days I feel like I'm flailing. There's a new crisis every hour. Half the realm still doubts me and the other half expects miracles." Catelyn reached out and touched his cheek. "All kings face such burdens. But you have found ways to bring calm after a storm of bloodshed. That is no small feat." He placed a hand over hers. "I still remember the day we learned of Father's death," he said quietly, eyes distant. "I told myself I would make the Lannisters pay, that I would be the king in the North. But I never imagined I'd be here, on the Iron Throne, forging a new era. There are times I feel," he paused, searching for words. "I feel a sense of awe and also fear of failing." His mother squeezed his hand gently. You will not fail. You have good advisors, loyal men, and the love of the people. Yes, mistakes will be made, but you stand for something more than power, Robb. You stand for justice and the good of the realm. As long as you hold on to that, you'll not stray. Robb's gaze traveled the length of the throne room across the mosaic floor to the twisted mass of swords behind him. Father always said the man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. I did that. Now I must wield the sword of justice for an entire realm. Catelyn nodded, pride and sadness mingling in her expression. He would be proud of you. Time wore on. The city's reconstruction advanced. Harvests from the Reach and Riverlands kept the capital fed. Although tensions still arose, Ironborn raids still flared up, and a few Westerland's lords seethed at their defeat, there was no major uprising. The snows grew thicker as winter approached in earnest, but a new wind seemed to blow through Westeros, a wind of cautious optimism. After the next year's thaw, Robb at last found time to journey north. The matters of the realm demanded he see the state of his ancestral seat, the place where his heart truly lay. Along with a retinue that included Catelyn, Jaime, and a small portion of the Crown's Guard, he departed King's Landing amid well-wishers who hoped the Wolf King would not stay away too long. He traveled up the King's Road, crossing into the Riverlands that had once been the heart of war. Now he saw farmland revived, villages rebuilding. A path of prosperity was emerging under the watchful governance he had instated. Lord Edmure greeted him warmly at Riverrun, hosting grand feasts to celebrate the king's passing. From there, he pressed into the north. The chill air greeted him like an old friend, and the forests whispered with ancestral voices. He visited Moat Cailin, forging stronger defenses to prevent any southern invasion in the future. He pressed on past the Neck into the wide tundras that eventually gave way to the familiar surroundings of home. But when at last he arrived at Winterfell, his heart clenched. The castle stood in partial ruin, battered walls testifying to the crimes of Theon Greyjoy and the ravages that had followed. Scaffolding covered sections where repairs were underway, manned by laborers from across the north. The sight of the broken towers and scorched timbers pained him beyond measure. He walked through the gates, greeted by the survivors of the Winterfell garrison. Those who remained knelt for him, tears in some eyes. The memory of better days haunted the courtyard. He saw ghosts of his younger self, wrestling with Jon, chasing Arya, teasing Sansa. Now the courtyard was quiet, marked by the scars of war. Grey wind sniffed at the charred remains, letting out a low whine. I failed you, Robb whispered to the stones. I left, and this happened. Catelyn touched his arm. It was not your doing. War took us all. Now you can help restore it. He nodded, resolve flooding him. Yes, he could not alter the past, but he could ensure Winterfell rose stronger than before. He met with the local stewards and engineers, dedicating funds from the crown to rebuild it into a bastion of northern strength. And there, in the Godwood, one of the few places unscathed, he knelt before the ancient heart tree. The face in the white bark seemed to watch him. He felt something akin to his father's presence, as though Ned Stark watched from beyond. Tears slipped down Robb's face, quiet but profound. I promised I'd protect them, he murmured to the cold air. I promised I would avenge you. A faint wind rustled the red leaves. Robb bowed his head, feeling the silent benediction of the old gods. In that hush, Jane approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. He rose slowly, turning to face her. She carried news from the south, letters reporting on continued stability. The regions he had left behind were managing in his absence. She also carried the hope that they might conceive an heir soon to secure the line of House Stark upon the Iron Throne. Robb took her hand, feeling a tremor of love and gratitude. She had stood by him despite all trials. He would honor that loyalty. That night, they slept in a refurbished chamber, the cold northern wind rattling the shutters. Robb lay awake, thinking of the future. He had claimed the greatest seat of power in Westeros, but his heart still belonged to Winterfell. Perhaps one day he might unify the realms so fully that his children could rule in peace, bridging the divide between north and south. The cost in lives had been so high. He vowed as he drifted off to do everything in his power to maintain that peace, no matter what challenges arose. The next day, he saw to the distribution of supplies throughout the northern villages impacted by the Ironborn raids. Lords from distant regions came to swear fealty directly to their king. The scions of House Mormont, House Glover, House Serwyn, and many more. Together, they pledged to stand behind him, not only as their liege lord but as king of the Seven Kingdoms. It was a moment of unity that deepened Robb's sense of responsibility. Before returning south, he made a pilgrimage to the site of Ned Stark's grave in the crypts beneath Winterfell. There, among the cold stone statues of generations past, he stood in silence, letting the darkness enfold him. A single torch flickered, illuminating the stern face of Ned's effigy. Robb placed a hand on the carved likeness of his father. "I have done what I set out to do," he said softly. "I have avenged you and claimed the throne. I will lead with the honor you taught me. I will be a king who remembers the lessons of the North." He left Winterfell with a renewed sense of purpose, traveling again down the long road to King's Landing. The realm waited, and with it the responsibilities of the crown. But he carried the North with him in his heart, certain that whatever storms lay ahead, he would meet them with the courage and honor of House Stark. Upon his return to the capital, the people greeted him with fanfare. It seemed that in his absence, the realm had continued to mend. Roads were safer, banditry less common. Lords once at odds now worked together, if only for mutual gain. The wheels of governance, turned by Robb's appointed stewards, had begun to churn steadily. The new king re-established himself on the Iron Throne, holding court with an even hand. Disputes from Dorne, the Westerlands, the Reach, and the Stormlands vied for attention, but progress toward reconciliation marched on. To keep this unity, Robb embarked on a bold plan, reorganizing the realm's laws to better protect common folk and ensure fairness in taxation. He also decreed that the atrocities of the war, looting, mistreatment of civilians, forced subjugations would not be forgotten, and a commission of inquiry would be established to grant survivors a voice. Such measures were unprecedented in a land used to brutal cycles of retribution. Some lords grumbled, but the majority recognized the wisdom in preventing further unrest. Seasons turned. The moon waxed and waned. Jain bore Robb a son, a healthy child with the spark of the North in his gray eyes. The realm celebrated the birth of the prince who would be the next Stark king if fate allowed. A grand feast lit the halls of the Red Keep, with northern music echoing through corridors that once trembled under the Lannisters. The people cheered this sign of continuity, the promise of a new generation to maintain peace. Yet, amid the revelry, Robb never allowed himself complacency. He knew that outside forces might test him. The uncertain fortunes of Daenerys Targaryen still loomed across the sea. Wilding activities beyond the Wall were rumored to be stirring. But for the moment, the realm was at peace in a way it had not been for years. The battered kingdoms were mending, forging a future under a king who carried the North's honor and the South's grace in equal measure. So it was that Robb Stark reigned. His name traveled across the Seven Kingdoms and beyond. Foreign merchants whispered of the Wolf King's justice, of how he had slain the Lannister lion and broken the false king's line. They spoke of how he kept faith with old allies, forging new ties without discarding old vows. They marveled at how the fearsome dire wolf guarded the Red Keep, that living symbol of northern resilience. Generations later, minstrels would sing of his tale as a grand romance of vengeance and victory, of the boy who set forth from Winterfell to wage war for his father's memory and ended on the Iron Throne, forging a new era of hope. Some would remember him for the trials and tribulations he endured, the mistakes and the mercies he offered. Others would hold him as the perfect example of a just ruler, though no man could truly be perfect. But in the hearts of those who served under him, King Robb was the wolf who overcame the lion's roar and the false monarchy, bringing an end to the War of the Five Kings. There, in the seat of power so far from the snows of Winterfell, Robb Stark upheld the ideals of honor and duty taught to him by Ned Stark. He was a king for the North and for the entire realm, a guardian willing to defend his people from all threats, be they external or from within. Through his reign, the Seven Kingdoms discovered that sometimes the best kings were the ones who had never sought the throne, but rose to the challenge when destiny and duty required it. So the realm found healing in his shadow, and peace took root in the land, at least for a time, under the watchful eyes of the Wolf King, whose banner still flew high, a gray dire wolf on a field of white and silver, an enduring promise of a better tomorrow. Robb Stark stood upon a balcony of the Red Keep, watching the city awaken. He breathed in the dawn air, touched by the distant scent of the Blackwater and the smells of cooking fires that spiraled upward from cramped alleyways. The city's white stone glowed faintly gold in the early light, and if he half-closed his eyes, he could almost imagine it at peace. His own peace, however, was precarious. Heavy matters of state pressed in from all quarters, demanding attention he was not always sure how best to give. Too many lords, too many new tensions, too many old wounds. But somewhere below, in a spacious chamber near the Maiden Vault, Jain was with their infant son, and that single fact lent him strength. He thought of the child's gray eyes, so reminiscent of the North, and told himself the struggles yet to come would be worth enduring if they could grant the next generation a land that was not torn by war. The morning's business soon reminded him that peace in Westeros was never guaranteed. Barely had he turned from the balcony when a steward approached, bowing swiftly, bearing a letter with the Martell Sun Ant Spear crest. Robb had grown used to such letters. The Martells and Dorne were testing his intentions. They had fought to remain partly autonomous from the Iron Throne ever since the days of Daeron and the conquest that wed the Roynish traditions to the realm. Now, with the Stark on the throne, they hoped to press old claims or at least ensure that justice was done for Elia Martell's death so many years ago. Robb had promised that Tywin Lannister's final end would bring them some measure of satisfaction. Tywin was gone, and so the Martells expected more. Those who had personally wronged Elia, Gregor Clegane, Amory Lorch, and others were dead or scattered. But Doran Martell's patience was legendary, and Robb suspected the Prince of Dorne might still hold grudges in reserve. For the moment, Dorne cooperated, lured by favorable treatment in the new era, but the letter carried a cautionary edge, a request for an official tribunal to revisit details of Elia's murder and the Targaryen children. Robb felt his jaw clench. He did not object to the principle of justice, but day by day the complexities of the realm only widened. He read the letter twice, then passed it to Maester Ronal, who had become his principal advisor in written matters. The man was older than Robb, stooped, and had formerly served at Rosby. "We'll need a measured reply," Robb said quietly. "Tell them we affirm our commitment to investigating these crimes, and we propose that Prince Doran send a representative to the capital to collaborate with the Master of Laws. If Dorne is still unsatisfied, I'll host a hearing myself." The Maester nodded. "Yes, Your Grace." "See that it's done at once," Robb said, already turning away. "I'll draft a final form of the letter myself later." He strode down the corridor, a swirl of guards falling in around him. The Crowned Guard, as many had taken to calling them, were men who had proven their loyalty on the battlefield and in the months since his coronation. Some were of northern birth, but Robb had also included knights from the Reach, the Westerlands, and the Stormlands to keep the peace. That they wore cloaks of a neutral silver gray rather than Lannister crimson or Kingsguard white underscored the new nature of this reign. Traditions changed slowly, but everything about his ascension had been unprecedented. He took the winding staircase to the throne room where an audience was scheduled for the morning. People called it the Hall of the Wolf King, though no official name had replaced the Great Hall. But the old Targaryen and Baratheon banners were gone, replaced by the dire wolf of House Stark. The flight of steps leading to the Iron Throne seemed longer than before. The seat, hammered from the swords of conquered foes, had not grown any kinder in all these months. Yet Robb had adapted to the sense of power it gave, a feeling he still distrusted in his own heart. The day's petitioners were already assembled in the shadows of the pillars, a group from Maidenpool bearing grievances of theft along the roads, a cluster of petty knights from the Crownlands seeking restoration of land confiscated by the Lannisters, and, quite unexpectedly, two silent sisters who asked for permission to retrieve certain remains from the dungeons for proper burial. Robb had not been told the specifics, but he suspected it might concern Cersei Lannister. She had been imprisoned below, forced into a vow of silent penitence. She remained alive. He had chosen to spare her life, hoping that might show the realm mercy was not weakness but principle. Still, the conditions of her confinement were bleak, and if the Silent Sisters now came forward, it suggested they had undertaken some solemn duty connected to the final chapters of the Lannister downfall. Robb steeled himself. Yet another reminder that the realm's troubles did not vanish simply because one war ended. When the audience began, the steward called each petitioner forward. Robb listened intently, striving for fairness. He granted new charters to merchants from Maidenpool, enforced new toll regulations for roads near Cracklaw Point, and approved a restitution measure for the knights whose lands had been seized. The Silent Sisters, thin and inscrutable behind their hoods, murmured that certain remains needed to be exhumed. Their vow of silence ordinarily prevented them from speech, but in official capacity they were permitted to speak the bare minimum if no septon or septa could represent them. They carried a letter from the High Septon himself, recently reinstated after King's Landing had descended into chaos. Robb read the letter. In so few words, it requested that the bodies of those who fell in the Red Keep's dungeons, left unclaimed and unburied, be turned over to the Faith for a final resting place. He hesitated, remembering the cruelty that had once reigned in these halls, but he could see little reason to refuse. He gave his assent, trusting that his men would ensure no hidden aims lurked behind the sisters' request. As the sisters left, gray wind rose from where he'd been lying near the dais, sniffing the air. The presence of Silent Sisters often unnerved people. They were said to be an omen of death. But the dire wolf only looked at them quietly. Robb watched them depart, and the day's business continued. By the afternoon, the great hall had emptied, leaving Robb with his mother, Catelyn Stark, and a few close advisors. They convened an impromptu council at the foot of the throne. Galbart Glover, who had come south for discussions about the North's reconstruction, waited patiently for Robb's attention. Next to him was Lady Brienne of Tarth, who had appeared in the capital a moon's turn ago with news from the Stormlands. She had once served Renly Baratheon, and though she'd lost that lord, she now sought to serve the realm. Finally, Peter Baelish lingered at the edges, wearing his mockingbird sigil and a polite smile. Robb took a seat on the bottom step rather than remain upon the Iron Throne, preferring to speak on more even ground. Grey Wind padded over and flopped down with a soft huff. Catelyn stood beside her son, offering that silent support that had guided him through so many battles. Galbart Glover gave a short bow. "Your Grace, I have tidings from the north. Your mother asked me to gather a full accounting of the reconstruction in Winterfell. I can confirm that the walls are halfway restored, with several towers returned to partial use. We've also set up a new wing of workshops. It'll be years yet before Winterfell is as it was, but the work continues." Robb nodded. "That is heartening. Did you see to the rest of the holds? The Manderleys, the Serwins, the Boltons?" Galbart's face darkened at the last name. "Aye. The Manderleys continue to show staunch loyalty, sending men and coin for repairs. The Serwins do the same, though they've endured difficult harvests. The Boltons, well, Roose Bolton remains the warden in the north, but his son, Ramsay, has made a name for cruelty. Many in the Dreadfort's vicinity are afraid to speak out. But for now, they comply with your rule, at least publicly." That was a grim truth. Robb had made the choice in haste after his southern victories, needing Bolton's manpower to secure the north from the Ironborn. Now that Tywin was dead and the Lannisters subdued, the uneasy question of the Boltons' loyalty loomed. Though Roose displayed courtesy, Robb had never trusted him fully. He could only imagine how the father might turn a blind eye to his son's cruel tendencies. Yet, as king, Robb could not dismantle a house so powerful in the north without risking another open rebellion. He exhaled and said, "Keep me informed. If any sign arises that Bolton oversteps, we will act. For the moment, the realm has had enough of open war. But I won't allow the north to be terrorized either." Galbart gave a determined nod. "I'll see to it." Next, Brienne of Tarth stepped forward. She was a formidable presence, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing plain armor absent of decorative sigils. "Your Grace, I have tidings from the Stormlands. The lords there are uncertain. Many had once sworn for King Stannis. Others had pledged themselves to Renly. Now some question whether they should hold out for a Baratheon to retake the Storm's End seat. But the castle remains in disrepair from the siege, and Edric Storm, the recognized bastard of Robert Baratheon, vanished into Essos, or so rumors say." Robb folded his hands. "Have they recognized me as king?" "Most have," Brienne answered. "Lord Penrose, who once held Storm's End, passed away. The new castellan stands ready to receive your men, but resources are lacking. I think if you were to send a garrison to Storm's End, it would quell unrest. It might also help rebuild the stronghold." Catelyn regarded her son. "Storm's End is vital to controlling the Stormlands. Too long has it lingered in disrepair. If another tries to claim it, some Baratheon loyalist or an upstart, trouble could brew." Robb looked thoughtful. "You speak truly. I'll send a small force to Storm's End to assist with repairs and maintain order. If any lords there still question my right, they can petition me directly. But the war is ended. I'd rather they find reason in peace than in further bloodshed." He paused. "Lady Brienne, I trust you know the lay of the Stormlands well. Would you serve as the link between my men and those lords? I value your honor and your experience." A flicker of surprise crossed Brienne's face, but she nodded. "Yes, your Grace. If you command it, I will see it done." He gave her a tight smile of respect. "Thank you. We'll discuss the details shortly." Finally, Peter Baelish cleared his throat, stepping forward with that serpentine grace that always put Robb's nerves on edge. "Your Grace, I bear tidings from the Vale, and perhaps interesting news of Essos as well. The Vale remains under Lady Lisa Arryn, your aunt, and we know she is protective. She seldom leaves the Eyrie, and the Knights of the Vale remain insular. Nonetheless, trade has resumed through the Mountains of the Moon, and they are fulfilling their feudal obligations to the crown. As for the other matter, I have corresponded with certain Braavosi bankers and acquaintances in Pentos. They whisper of Daenerys Targaryen establishing a growing power across the Narrow Sea. She has 3 dragons, so rumor says, and an army of freed slaves. They call her the Breaker of Chains, the Mother of Dragons." He paused, letting the words hang. Robb's eyes sharpened. "I have heard those tales. Some say she has conquered much of Slaver's Bay. Others say she roams the Dothraki Sea. We lack clarity." "And so we do," Baelish said in his soft voice. "But where facts are uncertain, fear takes root. The Targaryens once built this Iron Throne. Daenerys might believe it belongs to her by blood. She has no reason yet to make a crossing, but if she consolidates her position in the east, who can say what she'll do next? Certainly many here might flock to a Targaryen banner if she arrives, especially those who resent the Northern King's rule. Robb inclined his head. So you advise caution. I have no desire for further war, especially not a new Targaryen war. Yet if she does cross with dragons, ignoring her threat could be disastrous. Baelish gave a thin smile. Precisely, Your Grace. We must watch carefully. Perhaps it would behoove you to reach out diplomatically? Offer some manner of parley. Or at least see whether she truly intends to claim the Seven Kingdoms. A carefully chosen envoy might glean valuable truths. Catelyn frowned. Is it wise to acknowledge her claim in such a way? It might embolden her. Robb weighed his mother's words. True, but ignoring her entirely may push her to action. If she feels spurned, she might consider an invasion more readily. His gaze shifted to Baelish. Who would you suggest for such a mission, should I send one? Baelish gave a gracious half-bow. A far-traveled and subtle envoy, someone who can move in foreign courts without arousing suspicion. Possibly Ser Davos Seaworth if you could persuade him to your service. They say he once served Stannis and he is rumored to have a gift for negotiation. Robb's brows knitted. Davos Seaworth? The Onion Knight. He was loyal to Stannis. Do we know where he is? At last word, Baelish answered lightly. He was either in the north or wandering the narrow sea after Stannis' defeat and withdrawal. But a man with his cunning might be found if one knew where to look. Robb exhaled. I'll consider it. But for now, let us not rush. We have time to observe. If the Targaryen princess remains across the sea, we can focus on the realm's immediate needs. He offered a nod to Baelish. Thank you. That will be all for today. The discussion concluded and the small group dispersed. Catelyn lingered for a moment with her son. We face threats near and far. It seems your crown grows heavier. Robb nodded soberly. Every day. But we'll endure. We Starks always do. He placed a hand gently on her arm. I'll speak with you again this evening, Mother. She gave him a faint, weary smile, then left him to the hush of the throne room. Grey Wind trailed after her, but then paused at the door, turning to look back at Robb as though waiting. The Wolf King took a moment, standing at the foot of the throne steps, letting out a slow breath. The day was not yet half done, and already the intricacies of ruling threatened to swallow him whole. He left for the small council chamber, a quieter hall off to the side, once used by the Targaryens and Baratheons, now serving the same purpose under a Stark. The council was varied. Edmure Tully sat as master of laws, balancing the demands of the Riverlands with the complexities of the capital. Mace Tyrell, or rather his more capable son Garland Tyrell, offered counsel on the realm's finances. For the Tyrell gold helped rebuild the battered coffers. Maester Ronald advised on communications with other kingdoms, and a handful of knights and lords rotated in attendance depending on the topic at hand. Robb had also named an older knight, Ser Mark Ricker, as master of ships, though the navy was still a mere shadow of what the Baratheons had once commanded. They were assembling for the day's formal meeting. Robb took his seat at the head, letting them greet him with the usual pleasantries. Edmure wore a well-tailored doublet of river blue, still bearing signs of youthfulness despite the war's toll. Garland Tyrell, a knight of some renown, was impeccably polite as ever, though overshadowed by the flamboyance of his father's reputation. Roose Bolton was absent. He had returned to the Drefort some moons ago, though he remained nominally a part of the council. To Robb's left, Catelyn had a seat, for her counsel was invaluable. The first topic was the crown's debt. Garland Tyrell began, leaning forward with a ledger. My king, the Iron Bank remains insistent upon payments, though they have offered more favorable terms now that your rule appears stable. They extend credit as well, hoping for a beneficial arrangement. The interest rates, however, remain significant. Robb tapped the table lightly. We require funds for reconstruction, but I won't plunge us into an even deeper debt if we can avoid it. We must strengthen trade, ensure taxes are fairly assessed, and reduce corruption in the capital. Then we can meet obligations. Garland nodded. Agreed. The Reach can lend some gold to the crown at a lower interest if we formalize certain trade privileges. My father, Lord Mace, sees this as a good opportunity to expand shipments of grain to Dorne and the north. If we craft the right agreements, it could lighten your reliance on Braavosi loans. Catelyn's expression grew guarded. She knew well how easily the Tyrells could leverage their wealth for influence, but she acknowledged that the alliance was vital. If it secures peace, so be it, she said. Let us ensure the details do not give undue advantage to the Tyrells at the expense of other regions, though. Garland smiled politely. Of course, I will draft a balanced proposal. From there, the council moved on to discuss the war in the north against the Ironborn, who still raided from time to time under King Balon Greyjoy's orders. Reports indicated that the Great John Umber had taken several coastal towers, reclaiming them for the north, but Pike's longships remained a threat. Balon insisted that the Iron Islands should be independent. If pressed too hard, he might launch yet another wave of attacks. So far, no open confrontation had matched the scale of previous fighting, but the tension smoldered. Robb dreaded the thought of devoting large armies and fleets to subjugate the Iron Islands entirely. His father had always taught him war should be the last resort, especially after so much bloodshed. Edmure offered a perspective. We might negotiate a truce, though the Greyjoys rarely honor anything for long. Perhaps we can encourage them to focus their raids elsewhere or come to some tribute arrangement. He didn't look happy saying it. Better than letting them burn more villages. Robb grimaced. Paying them off only encourages more raids in the future. But any direct assault would cost thousands of lives. The Ironborn are formidable on the sea. Caitlyn's voice was steady. The Iron Islands have been beaten back many times. Balon cannot have many men left to spare. If we coordinate with loyal lords in the north, we can defend our coasts effectively. If we apply enough pressure, perhaps Balon's own lords might force him to see reason. They did revolt against him once before. Ser Mark Ricker tapped the table. To blockade Pike thoroughly, we'd need more ships. Our current fleet is dwarfed by the Ironborn. We must rely on your loyal houses in the north to provide the fishers and skirmishers. But if we spread them too thin, it's an invitation for Balon to pick them off one by one. Robb's gaze flicked over the map. We hold the advantage on land. If Balon tries to seize any major northern hold, he'll be destroyed. His only recourse is to raid and vanish. So we'll fortify the coasts, maintain a mobile response force. If the Ironborn push too far, they'll lose more than they gain. With time, they may grow weary of fruitless raids. He clenched his jaw. I regret that the North must suffer more of their depredations, but I'd rather not send thousands to drown in an invasion of Pike. Let's pray Balon sees sense eventually. They set the matter aside, uneasy but practical. Finally, talk shifted to the rumors of unnatural happenings beyond the wall. Reports from the Night's Watch had grown scarce. Ravens that did arrive spoke of White Walkers, the others dire warnings that most in the south dismissed as legends. Robb remembered how his father had once listened carefully to every scrap of information from the Watch. Ned Stark had believed in being prepared for any threat, no matter how improbable. Robb saw his mother's face tighten. She, too, recalled these warnings with concern. Caitlyn spoke softly. The Lord Commander was once Jeor Mormont. If he still lives, we should send supplies to the wall. Even if these rumors of White Walkers are untrue, the Watch is starved of men and resources. The king must not neglect them. The others exchanged uncertain looks. Many in the council were southernborn and had rarely given the wall more than a passing thought. But Garland Tyrell offered a slow nod. The cost of some grain and a few wagons of supplies is negligible compared to the cost of ignoring a threat, real or imagined. I see no harm in aiding them. Robb felt relief that at least one of them understood. Agreed. Draw up the necessary provisions. We'll see them dispatched by ship from White Harbor or even from Eastwatch if possible. And I'll consider sending a small contingent of men to the wall to strengthen the garrisons. He paused, remembering that the man he had once called brother, Jon Snow, was said to have joined the Night's Watch. He had no word of Jon for many moons now. The thought pained him, but he forced it aside. Until we hear more, we'll treat the Watch as an integral part of the realm's defense. With that, the council. Il concluded. Robb rose, shoulders tight. He felt as though his mind had been battered by a dozen small storms. The realm's demands were endless. Still, he had accomplished something today. New trade proposals, watchful eyes on the Greyjoy threat, official support for the Night's Watch. It was a dance of careful steps, and each day brought new decisions that could shape the fate of millions. He took a moment to return to his chambers and see Jane and their son, Eddard, named, of course, for Robb's father. The baby was not yet a year old but already strong-lunged, able to wail with fierce determination when hunger struck. He was quiet now, dozing in a cradle near a window that admitted a mild breeze. Jane stood close by, humming a lullaby. The sight of them stripped away Robb's weariness, at least for a moment. Jane turned with a warm smile. She had grown more at ease in King's Landing, though she never loved its heat or its crowded streets. She was of the West originally, a daughter of House Westerling, but after marrying Robb, she had found herself queen of an entire realm, a position for which she had never been trained. Still, her kindness and loyalty shone. You look exhausted, she murmured. All well. He stepped forward, kissing her cheek, then gazing at the sleeping child. As well as it can be with half the realm's problems on my shoulders. But seeing you both reminds me what I'm fighting for. She brushed a stray curl from her face. You'll find a way. You always do. Then she studied him. The last time you took a real rest was... I can't recall. He chuckled wearily. There's no rest for the Wolf King, it seems. But perhaps once we ensure no new wars break out, I might steal some hours. She gestured to a small table where a tray of food awaited: bread, roasted duck, fresh fruit. At least eat. You can't rule on an empty stomach. Robb did so, savoring the simple meal in comfortable silence with his wife. The tensions of the day receded. He allowed himself to breathe, to remember he was a man, not just a king. He leaned down to brush his son's cheek gently. Eddard stirred, opening gray eyes that glinted in the lantern light. Robb felt his heart tighten at the silent vow he made. He would protect this child from the horrors he himself had endured. He stayed as long as he could, but duty called him away once more. Evening fell, and the city outside his window teemed with life. Lanterns lit the squares, traders hawked goods in the markets, whores called from the street of silk, and the ever-present clamor of King's Landing drifted up. Robb donned a simpler cloak, dark gray with a subtle dire wolf sigil, and ventured into the yard behind the Red Keep. There, men sparred under torchlight, practicing the sword, spear, and bow. Robb tried to join them nightly when time allowed, to keep his own skills sharp. He unclasped his cloak and stepped onto the packed dirt of the training ground. A hush fell as they recognized him. He beckoned one of the older knights to join him in a friendly bout. The man bowed, took up a blunted longsword, and they crossed steel. The ring of metal echoed in the warm night air. Robb moved with practiced ease, footwork guided by old lessons from Winterfell's master-at-arms. Each parry and riposte banished the swirl of political complexities from his mind. Within minutes, he had forced the knight to yield, though not without working up a sweat. Another came forward, then a third. He dispatched them both, though the last forced him back several steps. The watchers cheered, some kneeling, some merely pounding swords against shields in applause. As Robb lowered his blade, breath quickened, gray wind came padding from the shadows to circle near him. The direwolf's golden eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Robb scratched the wolf behind the ears, feeling a rush of gratitude for the beast's ever-present loyalty. The training yard might have been a scene from earlier days, when he was only the young heir of Winterfell, not burdened by the crown. For a moment, he allowed himself a small smile. He returned to the Red Keep's corridors, passing guards and courtiers who bowed. Light and shadow flickered across the walls. The bustle of day had quieted, replaced by the hush of evening. At last, he reached a small solar where Catelyn waited by a window, reading by the glow of a single candle. She looked up as he entered, a fleeting sorrow in her face reminding him that she had lost so much. Ned, her father, her children scattered. Yet she carried on with unbreakable will. "Mother," he said gently. "Robb, I've been reflecting on your day." She set aside her parchment. "You handle it all well, but I see how it weighs on you. And we must speak of the succession beyond you and your son." He blinked. "Succession?" She folded her hands. "The realm has known kings who neglected the line of succession, leading to civil strife. Should anything happen to you, 7 forbid, your son is still an infant. You must name a regent if something dire befalls you. And what of your siblings? Bran, Rickon, Arya, Sansa, each lost to us in different ways. We have had no new word of them in so long." Robb's throat tightened. Pain lanced through him at the mention of his siblings. Sansa, believed captive in the earlier stages of the war, had vanished. Some said she was spirited away, perhaps by Peter Baelish. Arya had escaped Harrenhal at some point, vanishing into the chaos of the Riverlands. Bran and Rickon had been presumed slain by Theon Greyjoy, though it came to light later that their bodies had never been conclusively identified. There were rumors they might live, but in the swirl of the war, no proof had surfaced. Robb often burned with guilt that he had not been there to protect them. He let out a slow breath. "I've sought any news I can find. Baelish claims ignorance, though he hints that he might know more of Sansa's fate. He says she might be in the Vale. I cannot trust him entirely, but if that's true, maybe Lisa Arryn shelters her. As for Arya, rumors place her anywhere from Bravos to the neck. Bran and Rickon. I pray they're alive somewhere. But I've nothing to go on." Catelyn reached out, her hand closing over his. "If we had a reliable spy master, we might learn more. Varys vanished after the city changed hands, and the position remains vacant. Peter Baelish tries to fill that role, but his loyalty is questionable." Robb nodded. "I know. We should consider candidates who can gather information discreetly. The realm is large, and to find my siblings, we need cunning eyes and ears. I'll speak to the council, but the matter is delicate. His mother pressed on, voice steady. In the meantime, if we must consider regency, I suggest you name a council of regents, not a single figure. Men and women you trust. I could serve, along with Edmure, perhaps Garland Tyrell, and 1 or 2 others. That way, no one person can seize control. Robb rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight intensify. You're right. It's prudent to prepare for the worst. Very well. If I fall, you and Edmure shall lead a council until Eddard comes of age. We can formalize it. She offered a sad smile. These are bitter considerations, but the realm's stability depends on them. He sighed. My father must have had to think of such things, though I never realized it. Now I understand his burdens better than ever. They spoke quietly for another hour, discussing the possibilities, the practicalities, and more. By the time Robb left the solar, the moon was high. He made his way to his chamber, found Jane and the baby asleep, and settled in quietly, letting the day's tension drain away. He drifted into a restless slumber filled with fleeting dreams of a snowy Winterfell yard and echoes of wolf howls. Days stretched into weeks. The reconstruction in the north advanced. Storm's End received the promised garrison under Brienne's supervision, restoring a measure of calm to the Stormlands. Letters came from Dorne, expressing measured satisfaction with progress on investigating old Lannister crimes. The Tyrell proposals for trade privileges moved forward, with Garland guiding them tactfully. Robb ordered additional shipments of grain and supplies to the Wall, hoping to strengthen the Night's Watch. The Greyjoys remained a thorn, but with the North's coasts now better fortified, Balon's raids became petty inconveniences rather than major threats. Yet one morning, everything changed when a raven arrived from the Vale. Its contents, written in a trembling hand bearing Lady Lysa Arryn's seal, spoke of turmoil in the Eyrie. The letter claimed that Peter Baelish had arrived and demanded Lysa's hand in marriage. Rumor said Sansa Stark was indeed in the Eyrie, hidden under a false name. The letter hinted at conflict, fear, and a perilous situation for Lysa's son, Robert Arryn. And then, as if the writer feared discovery, the text ended abruptly. No direct mention of Sansa's condition, only a frantic request that King Robb intervene if matters turned dire. Robb's heart hammered as he read and reread it. For so long, he had no news of his sister. Now, if this was true, she might be within reach. But if Baelish was maneuvering to control the Vale and Sansa's fate, danger was certain. Lysa Arryn's sanity had always been questionable, and if Baelish stoked her paranoia, who knew what might follow? Sansa was an innocent who had already suffered too much at the Lannisters' hands. The king's decision came swiftly. He would dispatch an envoy or perhaps lead a contingent himself to ensure Sansa's safety and the Vale's stability. He summoned a hurried meeting of his council in the small chamber, ignoring formalities. Edmure Tully arrived yawning, Garland Tyrell with worry etched on his features, and Catelyn with tension radiating from her stance. The letter was read aloud. Murmurs of alarm ran around the table. We cannot allow Peter Baelish to hold Sansa in that precarious environment, Robb said firmly. He's cunning. He was once master of coin under the Lannisters, and he changes allegiances with ease. Catelyn's eyes flashed with both hope and fear. We must rescue her. She is a Stark. We've lost too many. If she's truly there, I'll ride out myself if I must. Edmure, more pragmatic, frowned. Invading the Vale is no small thing. Their knights are among the best in the realm, and that fortress at the Eyrie is nearly impregnable. If Lysa sees an armed host approach, she may turn on us. Robb took a breath. I don't propose an invasion. We can't afford another war. But we can send a strong escort to the Bloody Gate, request safe entry as rightful king, and demand an audience. If Lysa truly seeks help, she might allow it. At worst, we negotiate. If Baelish has manipulated her, we expose him. Garland Tyrell leaned forward. Your Grace, let me remind you we must not appear weak or indecisive. If Baelish's influence spreads, it undermines your authority. We have to demonstrate to the Vale that you, as king, can protect your own sister. But a delicate touch is required. Robb nodded. Agreed. I'll go in person. The presence of the king can be a statement by itself, and it might calm Lysa's fears. I'll take a moderate force, enough to show strength, not so many that she feels threatened with invasion. Catelyn squeezed Robb's hand. I'll go with you. Lysa is my sister. She may be more receptive to family. He hesitated, thinking of her safety. But she was right. Lysa might open doors for her sister that she'd slam shut to others. Yes, you'll come, he agreed. Edmure, you remain here as hand in my absence. It was an informal usage of the title hand, but the realm understood Edmure served as Robb's second in all but name. Edmure inclined his head. I'll do my best to keep matters stable in the capital. Robb turned to Garland. Keep the Tyrell alliance firm. I'll rely on you to watch for any disruptions. If anything urgent arises, dispatch a raven, and I'll return as soon as I can." Garland bowed. "Understood, Your Grace." Plans were swiftly laid. Within a fortnight, Robb assembled a contingent of 500 men, most of them cavalry for speed, each hand-picked for loyalty and discipline. He left Jane and the infant prince in King's Landing, guarded by the newly reformed Crown Guard, and gave Edmure Tully full authority to address pressing issues in his name. He also left instructions that, should anything befall him, the realm would rally around Eddard with a regency council formed by Catelyn, Edmure, and others. That unwelcome possibility weighed on him as he made his farewells. Early dawn saw the king and his party ride out of the city gates. Robb wore a cloak of thick gray wool, clasped at the shoulder with a bronze direwolf pin. Catelyn rode beside him, her expression resolute. Behind them rode knights bearing the Stark banner alongside the shroud of House Tully. People lining the streets bowed, though some only gazed with guarded curiosity. The memory of so many changes in power had left the populace cautious. Grey Wind loped alongside the column, silent but ever watchful. They made good time along the Rosby Road, turning northeast toward the Vale. Past rolling green hills and farmland they traveled, crossing the occasional stream by narrow bridges. The weather was pleasant, though the road grew rougher the farther they ventured from the Crownlands. Occasional travelers doffed caps at the king's passage, many startled to see him with so few men. Robb listened for rumors, gleaning bits of local gossip, bandits near the foothills, talk of rumored Vale Knights patrolling the pass, speculation about the king's business. After nearly 2 weeks, they reached the inn at the crossroads where the Trident forked, one branch leading north to the Neck, another east to the Vale. The building was an old friend to travelers, and Robb found it crowded with merchants, sellswords, and a few peddlers. As he and his men settled in for the evening, voices hushed in recognition of the Stark banners. The innkeeper rushed forward with fawning courtesy, offering the best rooms and a hearty stew. Robb politely thanked her and made no mention of payment aside from fair coin. He had little taste for the excesses of kingly arrogance. That night, as they supped around the inn's main hearth, Catelyn noticed a hooded figure by the corner who seemed to observe them intently. The figure's posture was that of a soldier, but no sigil was visible. Catelyn pointed this out to Robb, who nodded to one of his guards. The guard approached, inquiring politely if the stranger needed anything. A moment passed and the man lowered his hood. He was older, scarred, with a patch over one eye. He introduced himself as a former sellsword who had traveled from the Vale. Sensing a possible source of information, Robb motioned for him to come closer. "Tell me," Robb said, offering the man a seat near the fire. "What news from the Vale?" The man's single eye gleamed with wariness, but he saw the king's colors. "Hard times, Your Grace. Lisa Arryn rules from the Eyrie, but she rarely leaves the castle. Her bannermen mutter that she's grown unstable, clinging too fiercely to her son's fragile health. And there's talk that Peter Baelish is her new consort, married in secret, some say." Catelyn inhaled sharply. Robb kept his composure. "Is that so? And the Knights of the Vale, how do they stand?" The man shrugged. "Lord Yohn Royce, they say, is no friend of Baelish. Nor are the other High Lords. But Lisa's authority is absolute in the Eyrie, and the boy is heir to the Vale. Baelish is cunning, so he's trying to win them over. I left when I saw trouble brewing. I'd rather not be entangled in the Vale's politics." Robb offered him a few silver stags for the information. The man bowed and left. Catelyn's lips pressed together. "Married? That means Peter is Robert Arryn's stepfather with a claim to the Vale through Lisa. He's far craftier than I feared." Robb nodded slowly. "And Sansa is in his grasp if she's truly there. We must move with caution. If we arrive unannounced, Peter might conceal her, or worse. But we also cannot send word ahead, for if he has spies on the roads, he'll be prepared." They spoke long into the night, forging a plan. At dawn, they set out with renewed purpose, quickening their pace. The weather held fair, and soon the mountains of the Vale rose before them, jagged peaks wreathed in low-slung clouds. They passed through foothills dotted with pine forests, the air turning crisp and cool. At last, they approached the Bloody Gate, a narrow pass flanked by 2 massive ramparts. It was said that an army 1,000 strong could be held here by just a handful of knights. Banners flew from the walls and the guards stood watchful. Robb rode forward, raising a hand in a signal of peaceful intent. "I am Robb Stark, King of the 7 Kingdoms," he called, voice carrying in the still mountain air. "I request entry into the Vale to visit Lady Lisa Arryn and discuss urgent family matters." For a tense moment, no one answered. Then a knight in steel plate appeared on the rampart. He had a salt and pepper beard and wore the sigil of House Royce, bronze armor ornamented with runes. Robb recognized him from descriptions. Yohn Royce, known as Bronze Yohn. He peered down. "King Robb," he called, voice echoing. "We did not expect you. Why have you come with arms?" Robb kept his tone measured. "I bring a small escort for my safety, no more. I wish to see my aunt, Lisa Arryn, and ensure the well-being of my sister, if she is indeed here. No ill intent, Lord Royce." Royce's eyes flicked over the 500 men. "That remains to be seen. The Vale is suspicious of strangers these days. But I'll not bar the rightful king from seeking his kin. We'll permit you through under watch. Be warned, Peter Baelish holds sway with the Lady Lisa, and she heeds him above all. Tread carefully." So saying, Royce signaled to open the gate. With slow groans of ancient iron and stone, the pass unbarred, allowing Robb's party to continue. Royce descended from the rampart and rode to meet them. He greeted Robb with a respectful dip of his head, then offered a bow to Catelyn, who recognized him from her younger years. They exchanged cautious words. Royce admitted that Peter's marriage to Lisa had shocked many in the Vale, and he remained unconvinced that Baelish had the Vale's interests at heart. They pressed on up the steep mountain trails that led deeper into the Vale, escorted now by a small company of Royce's men to ensure no bandits harassed them. The air grew thinner, the path wound along dizzying cliffs. Catelyn recalled traveling here with Tyrion Lannister as a prisoner once, and the memory made her shiver. At last, perched upon a towering peak, the Eyrie came into sight, white walls gleaming in the sunlight. Even from a distance, its precarious grandeur was humbling. As they neared the gates of the Eyrie itself, they were greeted by a Vale knight wearing the crescent moon sigil. He led them into the courtyard, a small, windy space overshadowed by the high walls. Robb left the bulk of his men outside, taking only Catelyn, a handful of guards, and Grey Wind. The presence of the dire wolf made the Vale Knights uneasy, but none dared forbid the king from bringing his companion. They climbed the narrow steps into the castle's inner halls, the biting wind chasing them. Inside, the corridors were chilly, decorated with Arryn banners. Servants scurried about with furtive glances. Before long, they were ushered into the High Hall, a cavernous chamber known for its famous moon door, a terrifying opening in the floor that dropped thousands of feet to the rocky valleys below. Robb felt the hair on high. Neck prickle. This was where Lisa had tried and executed those she deemed enemies, sending them flying out into the emptiness. At the far end of the High Hall waited Lisa Arryn. She was dressed in regal blue robes, but her hair was slightly disheveled. Next to her, Peter Baelish stood with the air of a man supremely confident in his position. The child, Robert Arryn, slouched in a seat, eyes darting with anxious energy. Lisa's expression was guarded, flickering between forced warmth and suspicion. Catelyn stepped forward first, speaking gently. "Sister, we've come because we heard troubling news. I'm so glad to see you safe." Lisa's face struggled to settle on a single emotion. At last, she forced a smile. "Cat, you should have sent word. This is quite unexpected." Robb came to stand beside his mother, Grey Wind at his heel. "Lady Lisa, I come as your nephew and as king to ensure your well-being and that of my sister, Sansa. I have heard rumors she is here. Is that true?" Peter Baelish answered smoothly before Lisa could speak. "Your Grace, you must be mistaken. Lady Sansa is not present at the Eyrie. Perhaps you were misinformed. We would, of course, welcome her if she sought refuge." Lisa glanced sideways at Baelish, then at Catelyn. A flicker of confusion or doubt fluttered across her features as though struggling to keep a secret. "If Sansa were here, I would certainly share the news, dear sister. But she is not." Catelyn frowned. The tension in the room thickened. Robb felt Grey Wind bristle at his side, the dire wolf sensing the undercurrent of discord. Robert Arryn let out a small whimper, as if unsettled by the visitors or by the mood. Baelish laid a hand on the boy's shoulder to calm him. Robb spoke calmly. "May we see your halls, speak with your people? Sansa has endured much. If she's here, I wish only to protect her. I intend no harm to your rule over the Vale." Baelish's gaze flicked over Robb's face. "That is gracious of you, your grace. But Lady Lisa and young Lord Robert must preserve their privacy. The Eyrie is not open to roaming investigations." Catelyn pressed forward, voice sharp. "She is my daughter. I have the right to know if she's here." Lisa's composure frayed. "We have no reason to keep her from you, Cat. If she were truly here—" A timid voice from behind a column suddenly spoke, and Robb's heart jolted. "Mother." It was Sansa. She stepped into view wearing a simple pale gown, her hair tinted auburn by the torchlight. She looked older, thinner, eyes haunted with the memory of King's Landing, of Joffrey, of all she had endured. Her hands trembled at her sides. Lisa's face went ashen at being contradicted, while Baelish's expression tightened with annoyance that Sansa had revealed herself. "Sansa!" Catelyn gasped, rushing forward to embrace her. The girl collapsed into her mother's arms, sobbing. Robb felt a surge of relief and anger all at once. Anger that Baelish and Lysa had tried to hide her, relief that she was alive and within reach. He stepped forward too, placing a gentle hand on his sister's shoulder. Sansa's eyes widened with recognition and a mixture of joy and fear. "Robb, you're alive. I heard so many stories that the war killed you or the Lannisters took you or—" He gave her a reassuring nod, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I'm alive, little sister. And you're safe now." Lysa glared at Sansa, voice trembling with indignation. "Sansa, we discussed this. We told you it was best to remain hidden for your own protection. Why did you, But Peter Baelish took a step forward, holding up a hand. "Calm, my dear," he said to Lysa in a soothing tone. Sansa must have misunderstood. Catelyn, however, was not to be so easily placated. She turned on Peter with fury in her eyes. "Misunderstood? Did you plan to hold my daughter hostage? Trade her for influence over the king?" Baelish's expression flickered, then smoothed into a grin. "Hostage is such an ugly word. I offered Sansa safety from the Lannisters, from the chaos of the capital." Sansa drew a shaky breath, still pressed close to Catelyn. "He told me that if I revealed my identity, the Lannisters might come for me again. He said we must lie for my own good." Robb felt a surge of cold anger tighten his chest. "And what did you hope to gain, Baelish? The Vale? A claim on the north? Or power in the capital by controlling a Stark's fate?" Baelish tilted his head. "Your Grace, you misjudge me. My only goal was to protect poor Sansa from the fate that befell her father. You know how dangerous the realm can be for a young maid." Lysa, eyes flicking between Baelish and the reunited Starks, grew agitated. She wrung her hands. "Peter told me it was best this way. That if the realm discovered Sansa's location, enemies would come. I only did what he advised, for the good of my son, for the Vale." Her eyes darted around, near panic. "I want no trouble. We are family, Cat." Catelyn's voice was cold. "You are family, Lysa, but you deceived me about my own daughter." Robert Arryn whimpered, "Mother, I'm scared." Peter placed a comforting hand on Robert's shoulder again, but the boy flinched, uncertain. Robb watched the interplay, seeing the fear that Baelish stirred in them. He sensed that Lysa was on the verge of a breakdown. She had always been unstable, prone to extremes of emotion. A single spark might unleash chaos. And the Ares' dreaded moon door loomed nearby, the wind whistling around it. He spoke calmly, "I'm here to take my sister home. If the Vale wishes to remain allied with the crown, it shall do so in good faith. But there will be no more lies about Sansa's presence." Baelish's eyes narrowed, losing some of their courteous sheen. "Your Grace, the Vale is not a puppet. Lady Lysa is mistress here, and I am her lawful husband." "Are you?" Robb retorted. "The Vale lords might have something to say about that. Lord Royce for one. And you deceived me from the first moment I arrived." Baelish opened his mouth to respond, but Sansa suddenly slipped from Catelyn's embrace and clung to Robb's arm. Her voice was soft but urgent. "Please, can we leave now?" "He has tried to," she shuddered. "He speaks to me in ways that frighten me. He says I remind him of my mother, that if I only yield to his counsel, all will be well." A hush fell over the hall. Catelyn's face went pale with horror. Robb's anger hardened. Lysa let out a nervous laugh, as though desperate to dismiss Sansa's words as a delusion. But the tension was tangible. Robb addressed Baelish with iron in his voice. "You will not touch my sister again. She leaves with me. Any attempt to stop that and you will face the king's justice." Baelish's cunning eyes flicked to the moon door. For an instant, Robb thought he might lunge for Sansa or attempt some desperate measure. Lysa drew a shaky breath, looking as if she might crumble. Robert Arryn cowered, whining for his mother to stop the strangers. The wind stirred at their backs, whistling across the yawning drop below. Then footsteps echoed at the entrance to the high hall. Lord Yohn Royce and a handful of Vale knights appeared, having apparently followed behind to see how this confrontation would end. Royce's stern gaze passed over Baelish, Lysa, and the Starks, quickly taking the measure of the scene. "Lady Lysa," he said, "I regret any pain you feel, but we cannot abide subterfuge. The Vale lords have grown weary of Baelish's manipulations. If the king desires to take his sister safely away, we shall not hinder him." Lysa gave a startled gasp. She looked at Baelish, but he offered no immediate reassurance. Instead, Peter's lips pressed together, calculating. He seemed to sense the tide turning against him. "You have no right," he hissed at Royce. "I am the lady's husband, empowered to speak for the Vale." Royce's stare was unyielding. "We vow loyalty to the Arryns, not to some up-jumped lord from the Fingers. The Arry belongs to House Arryn. We will not see it used as a cage." Robb placed a gentle hand on Sansa's shoulder, guiding her protectively. He realized a violent struggle could still erupt if Lisa or Baelish lost their composure. But the presence of the Vale Knights, evidently unhappy with Baelish, weighed heavily on the outcome. Baelish looked cornered. Catelyn said to Lisa, "Sister, let us leave on amicable terms. The Vale can remain at peace. I promise the crown will not harm you. But Sansa is coming with us." Lisa's eyes darted to her trembling son, then to Peter. She visibly fought an internal battle, torn between her new husband's influence and the pleas of her own blood. At last, with a sob, she buried her face in her hands. "Fine, take the girl. Just leave me be. Leave the Vale in peace." She turned away, shoulders quaking. Baelish inhaled to argue, but Royce and his knights stepped closer. One placed a firm hand on Peter's shoulder. Baelish turned a furious glare on him, but no matter how cunning his plots, a half-dozen armed knights left him no recourse. "This is not over," he muttered. "The Vale is not for you to meddle in, Wolf King." Robb gave a curt nod to Royce. "My thanks, Lord Royce. The realm needs stability. If the Vale is to remain free of war, it must not be held under Baelish's machinations. I trust your lords can decide how best to proceed." Royce inclined his head. "We can. I'll personally escort you down the mountain, sire. And I'll see to it that Lady Lisa's position is respected, but that no harm befalls Sansa Stark." "It's done," Robb said quietly. He turned to Sansa, who clutched his arm with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. "Let us depart." They left the high hall, trailing out into the corridor. Lisa's sobs followed them, echoing off the cold stone walls. Baelish stood rooted to the spot, pinned by the watchful stares of Vale Knights. Robert Arryn cried for his mother, but was shushed by a maidservant. The entire scene was a swirl of heartbreak and the quiet triumph of truth over deception. Robb guided Sansa through the labyrinthine corridors back to the courtyard. Catelyn and Lord Royce walked with them, while the rest of Robb's guard brought up the rear, gray wind padding close. The men outside greeted the news with cautious approval. Those loyal to Lisa or Baelish were uncertain, but the majority were relieved at the possibility of forging better relations with the crown. Royce himself promised to keep the Vale from the brink of conflict, stating that if Lady Lisa chose to remain secluded, the assembled lords would handle governance until Robert Arryn was of age. By midday, Robb and his party descended the steep mountain road. Sansa rode beside him, wearing a borrowed cloak of gray to shield her from the mountain chill. She appeared exhausted, but each hour away from the Eyrie seemed to ease her burden. She confided some of her experiences, how Peter Baelish had spirited her away from King's Landing after Joffrey's death, promising safety but never truly granting it. How she feared every day that she might be sent back to the Lannisters if she displeased him. Robb listened with mounting anger and sorrow, vowing silently to see Baelish answer for every torment he inflicted. They halted that evening at a modest mountain holdfast before reaching the Bloody Gate. There, in the flickering light of a small hearth, Sansa was at last reunited with her mother in privacy, free from Baelish's manipulations. Catelyn wept, Sansa wept, and Robb felt the tension in his chest relax for the first time in ages. One sister found, saved at last from a twisted trap. But he could not help thinking of Arya, Bran, Rickon, still lost to him. At least he had Sansa safe now. That was something. That was hope. He questioned her gently about King's Landing, about how she escaped, about who had aided Baelish, but she knew little beyond rumor. Cersei was imprisoned, Joffrey was dead, Tyrion Lannister had vanished, and the city was in chaos when Baelish took her away. She had not heard from Arya, nor from any of their younger brothers. She did know that Baelish once boasted of having eyes in many corners of the realm, that he played a grand game with all the lords and ladies as his pawns. It chilled Robb to think how nearly he had succeeded in controlling Sansa's fate. Come dawn, they set off for the Bloody Gate once more. Lord Royce accompanied them partway, offering final reassurances that the Vale would remain stable. As they passed through the gate, out of the mountainous territory, Robb at last allowed himself a long exhalation. Sansa sat her horse, her posture straighter now, a subtle relief in her face as the Vale heights faded behind them. Gray wind trotted close, occasionally sniffing her stirrup as if to confirm her presence. Their journey back toward King's Landing was slower, for Sansa was weary in mind and body. Yet the sense of victory was undeniable. They lodged again at the inn at the crossroads, where travelers marveled at the rescued Stark girl. Word began to spread, no doubt carried by passing merchants and swift riders. The Wolf King had reclaimed his sister from the Vale, and Peter Baelish's hold on power there was broken. Robb was not naive enough to think Baelish was finished. The mockingbird was cunning, apt to vanish and reappear when least expected. Perhaps he would lurk in the Vale, or flee to the Fingers, or slip away to the free cities. The realm was vast, and a man with his wits could find new schemes. But at least for now, Sansa was safe, and the Vale's lords were awakened to Baelish's manipulations. On the last stretch of road before the capital, with the spires of the city visible across the horizon, Sansa urged her horse alongside Robb. She looked at him with a faint smile. "Thank you for coming for me. I was so frightened. I never dreamed you would." He squeezed her hand. "You're my sister, Sansa. I'm sorry I couldn't save you sooner. The war, the politics, it was all so complicated." She nodded, eyes downcast. "I understand. You've become the king, and I hardly know how to behave anymore. Everything's changed so much. I used to dream of being a queen in King's Landing, but it was a nightmare under the Lannisters. Now, returning here, I'm not sure what to expect." Robb's chest ached with sympathy. "King's Landing has changed since Joffrey died. I've tried to make it safer, kinder. It's still the same city, but you won't be at the mercy of the Lannisters now. You'll have your family's protection." Catelyn rode on Sansa's other side, touching her shoulder softly. "We'll see you settled and comfortable. If you wish to return to the north once Winterfell is fully restored, you shall. But until then, stay with us in the Red Keep, or we can arrange a separate residence if you prefer." Sansa hesitated, remembering her time at court. Perhaps for now, I'll stay near you. I'm not ready to be alone in a strange place." Catelyn pulled her into a gentle side embrace, careful not to unseat her. "We'll keep you close, my sweet girl." When they reached the city gates, the gold cloaks gave way, cheering for the king's return. People thronged the streets. Word had obviously spread of his approach, and the presence of Sansa caused speculation to race among the onlookers. Robb took note that the crowds seemed more curious than hostile, an improvement from the days of Joffrey's cruelty when riots often threatened. Slowly, they made their way up the hill to the Red Keep. Inside, a retinue of royal guards and servants received them with bows and exclamations of welcome. At last, Sansa dismounted in the familiar courtyard of the castle that had once been her prison. She looked around, eyes full of memories, both painful and new. Jane emerged from a side doorway, carrying little Eddard in her arms, and she curtsied to Sansa with a kind smile, introducing herself as queen, though she quickly insisted Sansa treat her as family. Sansa, wide-eyed, tried to smile in return, though her gaze lingered on the baby in wonder. Robb gently led Sansa inside, where a suite of chambers had been hastily prepared for her comfort. He left her there with Catelyn and a few handmaidens to settle in. Then, at last, he was free to return to his own chambers with Jane and their son. He set down his sword belt, easing the tension in his shoulders. Grey Wind circled once and flopped to the floor, tail thumping. Jane touched his arm. "You've done a great thing. You rescued your sister. You must be relieved." "I am," Robb said, exhaling deeply. "But the realm remains full of challenges. Baelish will not vanish easily. The Greyjoys still raid. The Iron Bank expects their coin. The Watch needs supplies." He closed his eyes, letting the momentary relief wash over him. "And there's the question of Arya, Bran, Rickon. Where are they?" Jane's voice was soothing. "One day we may find them too. You found Sansa against all odds. Do not lose hope." He looked at her and their child, a fragile bubble of solace in a world of storms. "I'll hold on to hope," he murmured, pressing a kiss to Jane's brow. "I must." But that night, new tidings arrived by Raven, forcing his attention onward once more. Troubling reports of unrest in the Westerlands, where some Lannister bannermen refused to accept King Robb's rule without a direct Lannister overlord. Word also came from the Reach that Mace Tyrell grumbled about trade disputes with Dorne. A separate letter from the north indicated that Balon Greyjoy might be ill, and his daughter, Yara, Asha, to the Ironborn, was gathering ships at Pike. Then, too, the faint echoes of Daenerys Targaryen's conquests in Slaver's Bay drifted across the sea, uncertain but insistent. Robb read each letter by candlelight, a weary sense of inevitability settling over him. The war was won, but peace was never still. He folded the parchments, setting them aside. Tomorrow's struggles would require all his wit and strength. Yet for now at least, Sansa was safe under his roof. That was no small victory. As he laid down, letting weariness claim him, Robb recalled his father's words: "A ruler must be the shield of his people, placing their welfare above all else." He clung to that principle, determined that, come what may, he would strive to shield those he loved and the entire realm from the storms that always seemed to loom on the horizon. Morning dawned, and life in King's Landing pressed on in its hectic dance. Robb arranged a small welcome feast in Sansa's honor, inviting lords and ladies who had known her in the days of King Robert or King Joffrey as if to reclaim her rightful place as a Stark of Winterfell. Sansa sat at his right hand, quiet but polite, her eyes drifting uneasily across faces that once spurned or scorned her. Those who had mocked her illusions of southern courtesy now found her a more solemn figure, shaped by tragedy. Whispers circulated about the next steps the king would take. Some speculated that with Sansa saved, he might lead a new campaign to rescue Arya if rumors placed her in the Riverlands. Others worried about the chance of further tension with Baelish or the Vale. Some corners even gossiped that Daenerys Targaryen had dragons large enough to burn entire fleets. In every corner of the hall, the courtiers' tongues wagged, weaving the tapestry of rumor and intrigue that never ceased. Robb had no illusions that this feast would heal all wounds, but he wanted Sansa to see she was valued, that she was not alone. He toasted her bravery, praising the resilience of House Stark. He thanked the Vale for any courtesy they had shown, carefully refraining from condemning Lysa outright. The assembled lords nodded, some wearing expressions of genuine sympathy, others only feigned politeness. In the swirl of fine dresses and bright banners, Sansa tried to smile, but her relief was tenuous, overshadowed by the memories of her captivity. Afterwards, Robb found her in the castle's godswood, sitting by the newly planted weirwood sapling. She had tears on her cheeks. He approached quietly, giving her space, then settled beside her on a carved stone bench. Flowers that had been transplanted from the Riverlands dotted the grounds, overshadowed by the half-grown weirwood with its carved face. Though it was a far cry from the ancient godswood of Winterfell, the rustle of leaves gave a faint echo of the North's comfort. She sniffled. I can't help thinking about Father. He died here, and I stood in front of the Great September and watched them parade his head. And now I'm back, and it feels like a bad dream. Robb reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. I know, this place has so many dark memories, but we have a chance to make new ones. Father always said the godswood can be a place of solace. Even if this tree is young, it still carries the presence of the old gods. Sansa nodded, tears glistening. I pray they help me find peace. I feel so broken. I did horrible things. Pretending to be happy with Joffrey, betraying Father's innocence by confessing to a lie. I was weak. He squeezed her shoulder gently. You were a child caught in a viper's nest. There is no shame in what you had to do to survive. Father would never blame you. She let out a shaky breath. Thank you. A pause. What will happen now? Will I remain here as your sister, or is there a marriage in store? The realm is always hungry for alliances. Robb grimaced, thinking of the endless proposals that arrived daily. Lords suggesting betrothals to any Stark or Tully that might bind them to the royal line. But he shook his head. You're free to decide your own course, Sansa. I won't force you into a match for political gain. That's not who we are. You've suffered enough from others making choices for you. She bowed her head, relief mingling with uncertainty. Thank you. I don't know what I want yet. Part of me longs for Winterfell, but it's so damaged. Another part fears I'll never feel safe again. He nodded softly. We'll rebuild Winterfell. When it's ready, you can go north if you wish, or you can stay here. Whatever you choose, you'll have my support. A small smile crossed her lips, fragile as a new blossom. That helps more than you know. She glanced at the weirwood. Do you think Arya might come back someday, if she's alive? Robb's throat felt tight. I hope so. If Arya's out there, she'll come home when she can. She was always strong-willed. They sat in companionable silence, the trees whispering overhead. Eventually, Robb left her to her prayers and sought out the small council. Duty never slept. He passed through corridors bustling with officials, pages, and guards. The capital's daily life roared on, from the Great September ceremonies to the merchants bartering in the streets. High lords from the Westerlands had arrived, wanting an audience about the succession of Casterly Rock now that Tywin was gone and Jaime was rumored missing. Others from the Stormlands pressed for more funds to rebuild after the siege. The Tyrells insisted on finalizing their trade expansions. The Martells inquired when the official hearing on Elaya's murder would be held. The swirl of demands circled around him like ravens on the battlefield. Yet at the center he maintained calm. He was the Wolf King, a figure who had emerged from the nightmares of war to claim the throne. His father's honor guided him. Catelyn's wisdom supported him. Sansa's return reminded him that some pieces of his life could still be salvaged. And so, step by step, decision by decision, he pushed the realm forward, forging alliances, dispensing justice, and trying not to lose his soul in the process. Weeks slid by. Sansa began to recover, venturing occasionally into the city to see the changes under her brother's rule. She remained quiet, but the haunted look in her eyes slowly diminished. Meanwhile, Baelish's name flared up in small rumors. Some said he had fled the Vale entirely, slipping across the narrow sea. Others whispered he lurked in the Vale's lesser castles, plotting revenge. Lysa Arryn, unpredictable as ever, refused to relinquish formal rule, but the Vale lords formed a council to curb her more extreme decisions. Thus, the Vale teetered but did not topple. One morning, as Robb tackled a stack of petitions, a messenger arrived from across the sea. The man bore an unfamiliar sigil, a three-headed dragon upon black, but heavily stylized, nothing like the old Targaryen banners. The letter he carried was addressed to Robb Stark, King of the Seven Kingdoms. In a flowing hand, Robb frowned, opening it with caution. The text within was a polite but direct invitation from the court of Daenerys Targaryen in Meereen, addressed to the Wolf King. It invited him to send envoys to discuss the future of Westeros, as Daenerys claimed her rightful place as the last Targaryen. The letter assured him that, should he choose peaceful discourse, she bore him no ill will, but she would not abandon her ancestral claim. Robb felt a chill. The letter was a straightforward statement of intent. Daenerys Targaryen, across the sea, recognized him as a usurper sitting on the throne her forebears had forged. Yet she offered negotiation before any bloodshed. He summoned the council immediately, reading them the letter. Reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a challenge that demanded a show of strength, others a chance to forestall a second war if Daenerys arrived with dragons. He asked Sansa her opinion in private, recalling that she had once idolized tales of courtly life and might have insights. Sansa gazed at him with alarm. A Targaryen queen with dragons. The realm has never seen their like since Aegon's conquest. If she decides war is the only answer, how could we stand against Dragonfire? Robb admitted the truth. Even with all our forces, dragons would cause devastation. I have no wish to see another wave of suffering. Yet I cannot simply yield the Iron Throne we've bled for. The realm is only just recovering. Another war could shatter it. Sansa's voice was quiet. Would you consider a truce with her? Shared rule, perhaps? He grimaced. Shared rule is complex. She calls herself the rightful queen by blood. I was crowned by the Northern Lords and took the throne by conquest. Our claims clash. But if we meet, perhaps we can find a path that spares the realm a new war. Thus, he penned a careful reply expressing willingness to meet envoys from Meereen requesting more details. He offered to host them in King's Landing or arrange a neutral location. When the letter was dispatched by swift ship, all of King's Landing seemed to buzz with speculation. A new Targaryen claimant with living dragons could change everything. Some lords whispered that the Wolf King should launch a preemptive strike, sending assassins across the sea. Others said they should embrace her, merge the Targaryen legacy with Stark rule, forging an unbreakable alliance. Robb ignored such extremes, resolved to wait and see what Daenerys' next move would be. Meanwhile, the last vestiges of the War of the Five Kings finally sputtered out in the form of small rebellions in the Westerlands. Certain lesser Lannister cousins insisted Jaime or Tyrion should lead them, but neither Lannister brother was present to rally them. Kevan Lannister, Tywin's brother, had quietly bent the knee to Robb and served as a stabilizing influence. With careful negotiation and the presence of a royal garrison, Robb quelled the unrest, offering leniency in exchange for loyalty. It was not as bloody as Tywin's old methods, but the effect was the same: peace, at least on the surface. In the north, the Greyjohn and Roose Bolton's men pressed the Ironborn further back. Word came that Balon Greyjoy had died after a fall from a rope bridge in a storm, and his daughter Yara claimed the Seastone chair. She seemed more pragmatic than her father, rumor had it, possibly open to a truce if granted enough autonomy. Robb ordered envoys to treat with her, hoping to end the cycle of raids once and for all. He offered the Iron Islands a degree of local self-governance if they bent the knee to the crown and ceased all attacks on the north. The negotiations would take time, but a new page might be turned there as well. The year turned toward winter's deeper grasp, and the city saw the first flakes of snow drifting from gray skies, a rare occurrence so far south. People marveled at the sight, children laughing in the streets. Robb stood on a balcony with Sansa, watching the snow swirl around them, remembering the snows of Winterfell. It felt like a bittersweet homecoming. Then a steward arrived, announcing that the first ships bearing envoys from Meereen had been spotted off the coast. Robb and Sansa exchanged a weighted glance. The Targaryen question was about to step from rumor into reality. "So it begins," Robb murmured. "Perhaps we can stave off war, or the realm may yet burn." In the harbor, a trio of sleek, foreign-masted ships glided to anchor. Their sails bore no sigils that Robb recognized, but from the topmast flew a banner of black with a three-headed dragon in red. People along the quays muttered or cheered or stared in apprehension. Word spread swiftly through the capital. Daenerys Targaryen's envoys had arrived, and with them came the breath of a new age, an age shaped by dragons and the iron will of a wolf king. Robb donned his crown and cloak, assembled a guard, and prepared to greet these strangers. As he walked to the gates, with Sansa, Catelyn, and others at his side, he found his heart pounding. The future of the realm might hinge on these negotiations. He thought of Ned Stark, who had once believed in duty above all else, and prayed he had the wisdom to choose the path that would spare his people. The gates of the Red Keep swung open. A small procession entered, dark-skinned warriors from the east, a woman in flowing garments of midnight blue, a lean man with a noble cast to his features, perhaps Westerosi by birth. They advanced with measured steps, bearing themselves with quiet confidence. The woman stepped forward and bowed. "I am Missandei of Noth," she said in a calm, clear voice. "I speak for Daenerys Targaryen, breaker of chains, mother of dragons, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. We come in peace to hear King Robb Stark's words." Robb inclined his head, keeping his tone firm but courteous. "Welcome to King's Landing. I am Robb of House Stark, first of my name, King of the Undulls and the First Men, protector of the realm. Let us speak in peace, that we might avoid more bloodshed." Their gazes locked, each measuring the other. The city, the realm, and the future seemed to hold its breath. All the wars, sacrifices, alliances, and secrets had led to this moment. Sansa stood behind Robb, watching with anxious eyes. Gray wind prowled at the edges of the courtyard, hackles slightly raised at these foreign newcomers. Thus began the next chapter of Robb Stark's reign. The king who had toppled the Lannisters, reclaimed his sister, and fought to hold the realm together now faced the oldest legacy in Westeros, the Targaryen claim, backed by living dragons. Whether the realm would find a lasting peace or be consumed by a new war hung on choices yet to be made. And yet, in the hush of that first meeting, there was a glimmer of possibility that, just perhaps, honor and justice might guide the Seven Kingdoms toward a future unlike any it had known before. A future shaped by the young Wolf King who had dared to reach for the Iron Throne and, against all odds, claimed it not merely by the sword, but through hope for a better realm.